I raised my head from the drink in hand. The bane rocked as I felt the waves stand. A crashing fear ran over me as I turned to our mate of misery. What waits for us at port? What grand spectacle of the court? For what crime shall we be thrown in the pits of darkness down below? The mate at first did not reply before his calloused hands reached the sky. 10 cents per barrel of tea was a tax just a bit too steep for we. So now, son, we ride the waves, take them far as the charts will brave. For those who we once called friend would now wish to hang us in their stead. Hey! I shook my head from side to side. My family had crossed my mind. The mate left it off as he watched my eye and rose to the table proud and high. Oh yes, a price was paid for those we loved and the place we made. But what cost would you not see to keep your scraps of liberty? By now a few weeks had passed us by before the colors of the king had been spied across the edge of the water plain, closely gaining on the bane. Oh yes, a price was paid, those we loved and the place we made. But what cost would you not see to keep your scraps of liberty? The fight was brutal, deck to deck. Many of our brothers the waves had kept. As the bane limped away, we watched as our country sank today. Oh yes, a price was paid, those we loved and the place we made. But what cost would you not see to keep your scraps of liberty?
I love that. I love that so much. Today, we are going to talk about, in depth, if there is a pre-existing sort of philosophy that is closest to the what I hold, it would be Contractarianism. And we're going to do sort of a deep dive into that today. We're going to read one of the chapters of a book called Arguments for Liberty that describes it and goes into it. We're also going to, at the end, maybe contrast it with another one, which is like the bizarro world version of contractarianism called contractualism. So this is going to be nerdy. It's going to be a philosophy day. And we're going to have a special guest Christian with us today who wrote that sea shanty. Let's get into it. He has a plan, she has a plan, and you get to pay for it regardless.
The best way to get someone motivated is to stand for something strongly, deeply, passionately.
Subscribe to Disenthrall. Do as you're told.
Greetings, contractarianists. Welcome back to Disenthrall. I will be Patrick Smith today. We have with me Christian. How you doing, Christian?
I am doing fantastic. How about you?
Man, it's not the first time I've played your shanty, but man, you did a good job. Like, I love that. So, like, it all came from a Twitter thing, right? Where I was like, look, if it's not in the form of a sea shanty, I don't want to hear it. So if you have something to say to me, make a sea shanty. And he was like, challenge accepted. And he wrote that shanty, and it's badass. So good job, man. How do you do that?
When I have that much free time again, I'll make sure to remaster it. I definitely could do it better. So even just listening back to it, I was like, oh, I messed that up. I could have done this, but we'll save that for another day.
That's how it always goes with everything that we create, right? What's up, Anna? Good to see you. And Cap Gamer, good to see you. Rick, good to see you. Yeah, so today we're going to do some philosophy, which is why we have Christian here with us. So I think for maybe the first hour or so of the show, he and I are going to read this chapter from the book, like I said, Arguments for Liberty, called Contractarianism, written by Jan Narveson, which would probably be one of the biggest names attached to that philosophical framework. It argues for something called the social contract. But hold on. Like, it's not that social contract, the one that everybody thinks of and talks about when they say social contract. It is well, I won't put words in his mouth, but it's closer to an actual agreement between people. Like, not just this. I wish he had used a different word, honestly. What do you think? Do you have any thoughts before we start reading, Christian? Set this up.
Yeah, one of my hotter takes pretty recently is that social contract is a really easy word to meme on, but as far as what it means for something to be a social contract, I don't think voluntarism is like something without a social contract in it. I don't think saying that the nap is a social contract is in itself bad. I think social contracts have really negative connotations because they're used by statists to justify all sorts of horrible things. And most of the time, they don't even know what a social contract really is, philosophically speaking, and they're just using the word because it makes society, you know? So I'm sure that a lot of people kind of have a knee-jerk reaction to that term, but I think once you understand what a social contract actually means and what it's supposed to represent, then it's really not that scary. If it's not used in a malicious way, I think it's the best way of putting that.
Well, I mean, wait, are we about to argue for a social contract?
What are you, retarded?
No.
So I know you're not retarded. But what are you, Down syndrome?
No, so like the difference between the social contract that we're talking about and the one most people talk about is the element of coercion. It's the involuntary social contract, which is not really a contract at all because it's involuntary. All contracts must be voluntary to be valid, right? So it's good. I just wanted to call that out. He's going to be using the word social contract. It triggered me when I first read this stuff. So, but withhold judgment. Let's get started. So I'm literally going to read this to you guys. This is going to be story time with Patrick and Christian for a while. And anytime either of us has any thoughts or objections or things that we want to add or flavor, we're just going to speak up, and maybe Christian and I can sort of trade off on reading this. So I'll get started. Here we go.
I'll be taking notes the whole time too. So.
Oh yeah. And the other cool thing about this is like this will be an example of how we process a philosophical work. So this guy's going to be describing a philosophy, and we're going to be reading and dissecting it and proofing it and checking it. And this will be maybe a learning experience for how you apply critical thinking and reasoning and rationality to philosophy. Here we go. Chapter 4, Contractarianism by Jan Narveson. Oh, two more things. Hold on. So, I got to pimp this shirt. Can you guys see this? There you go. This is now in the disenthrall.me/swag store. It says, look. What does it say? Okay, now I can see myself. Look, I'm not going to give up my liberties because your grandma died. We can shoot it out if you like. That's now available at disenthrall.me/swag. If you want to be that guy, you know, publicly, visibly resisting the cult that is going on around us right now. And then, what was the other thing? Oh, I wanted to mention that I've produced this entire book as an actual audiobook without commentary. You can access that on this channel. The book is called Arguments for Liberty. It's like 9 chapters, and each chapter is a different philosopher. A different philosopher applying a different philosophy to liberty, to achieve the ends of liberty, libertarian goals and ends, from 9 different directions. Everything you can imagine, from shit that makes absolutely no sense, like Rawlsianism, ending up in libertarianism, to what we're about to read today, which is Contractarianism. So and I think it's a great book. It's like a 30,000 foot flyover of a bunch of different philosophies and how they can be sometimes twisted, but and other times just applied to achieve libertarian ends. And it's free. It's on this channel. If you guys want to be nerdy philosophers with me, you're welcome to go listen to that. All right. Without further ado, here we go. Chapter 4, Contractarianism, Jan Narveson. The general idea of the social contract theory has been around for a long time. There is a clear shot at it in Plato's Republic. For example, long before the more recent and famous efforts of Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Kant, and later John Rawls and David Gauthier. What is this general idea? And what is it an idea of? And how does it relate to libertarianism? These questions will be discussed in this chapter. Social contract is a theory about the foundations of a certain class of normative theories, moral and political. We begin by explaining the point of a foundational theory and of the advantages of this particular theory of that type. We then move on to the specifically moral and political nature of the resulting theory, concluding with the argument for libertarianism as the basic output of the theory. Theories of this type accomplish something important, but not nearly everything, and we will recognize its limits as well. Should we just trade off when we hit the major sections? Or what do you want to do? All right,
We
take
can
it
do
away.
that. All right. Social contract as normative foundation. The very subject of the foundations of a normative theory has long been and continues to be disputed by philosophers. As its name would suggest, the term refers to the basic premises on which the theory rests. It would take a very full discourse to explore the many byways of such a theory over the years, a project we can hardly undertake here. But several basic points may be noted. The first is that many theorists think that there are no foundations. A foundationist theory holds that there are certain, one or a few, basic general premises or kinds of premises that support a theory about what's just and unjust, right and wrong, support in the sense that the truths of the theory derive from those few or that one normative premise, plus relevant factual premises, those being subject to empirical tests.
All right, let's summarize that paragraph.
Yeah, so this is a really big paragraph, basically talking about. You could honestly almost break this down to like we'll say empiricist instead, but a subjective and an empiricist perspective on morality. So an anti-foundationalist basically is someone who would say there is nothing about the cosmos that you can underpin some morality to that would make it empirical or true across all of existence, right? One might say universalizable based on that empiricism. And so this is basically the distinction he's trying to make between the anti-foundationalists and the foundationalists.
And the other school of thought would be something like we just discussed in the recent video where we watched Mark Passio's work, where he claims or makes claims that there is an objective, quote, natural law, which is a series of equations you can use to apply moral judgments derived from the fabric of reality. So these are the two sides of this. And I think, what we're about to explore is not that. We're about to go down, a normative, what would you call it? Non-foundationist? What's the opposite of a foundationist? What would you call that?
Well, you would say anti-foundationalist typically. You could also just say subjectivist because it means the same thing in this context. You're subjective. You believe foundations are subjective. So.
Yep. Okay. Well, hopefully we clarified. Sally forth.
A separate question is whether those basic normative premises are themselves sui generis. That means of a given class, by the way. Or can they in turn be derived from facts of some sort? The latter view, of course, invites charges of committing the naturalistic fallacy that obsessed moral philosophers in the 20th century. I think it's funny how it's kind of like making fun of it a little bit in the background, but that was my commentary, by the way. Any theorist who attempts this latter route must respond to that charge. We will, in fact, do so in this exposition.
I want to interrupt.
Yeah, go for
because the naturalist fallacy is a big thing with a lot of people in this movement. They commit this fallacy quite often. I see it all the time. The fallacy is, let me read it. Closely related to the Aesop problem, which comes from David Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature. But unlike Hume's view of the Aesop problem, I'm reading the description, not the actual thing. Basically, it's if something is natural, therefore it is good, or therefore it is morally acceptable. And so a lot of people are saying, the vaccine debate right now is a big one. Like, the vaccine is unnatural. It is man-made. It is artificial. Therefore, it must not be good. It must not be safe. We must not want it in our bodies. This is a naturalistic fallacy. Just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's good or healthy. And in the case of medicine, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be medicine. And just because something is artificial or unnatural, whatever that means, doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. And so I think, yeah, the most contemporary example of that is certainly in the areas of medicine. A lot of people that subscribe to terrain theory may commit this fallacy fucking constantly. Yeah, all right. So that was that was the flavor I wanted to add around that. But yeah, go ahead and please continue.
No, that was good. That was good. As said, philosophers have a tendency to deny foundationalism in moral and political theory. And that attitude produces a general response. If no foundation exists, then how do you get anywhere in discussion when we disagree? And we so often do about such topics. If nothing you can say clearly counts and can be shown to count in favor of or against anything, then the prospect of resolution is nil. Is that bad? Yes, says the social contract theorist. And probably everyone would agree, if it can be done, that it would be nice. What they deny is that it can. The next thing to say is that a foundation is evidently useless if there is no better, no more solid. Oh, sorry. If it is no better or no more solid than what it purports to found, which I think is an interesting claim, actually, because I don't know if there's anything written in the universe that says this must be so, but this is an argument for utility. I believe that no one will use a moral theory if it's not solid in this case. We must not build on sand. This observation is especially important in relation to almost all current proposals about foundations. A major and highly pertinent example is a type of theory called intuitionist, according to which there are indeed basic moral claims in the sense that that no further reason can be advanced on behalf of such claims, which is also, he has a section in this book as well on intuitionism. So if you're interested in that, you can read or listen on Disenthrall. People may even assert that those claims are self-evident. The trouble with that, however, is that it is impossible to find any moral statements that have not been rejected by some. Indeed, there are amoralists, moral skeptics, who claim that there is no such thing as morality. What does the intuitionist say to them? What, that is, that might make some impression, might appeal to the rational faculties of the skeptic. The social contract theorist holds that there is something we can usefully say. That theorist likewise has a reply to the relativist who insists that morality is merely relative, such as to culture or personality, and so on. Which I do want to make a clarification real quick that I think he's kind of doing the same thing that I criticized Passio on. So just to be fair, relativist as a shorthand should probably just be subjectivist, because moral relativism is a specific subset of moral subjectivism. So yeah, I just wanted to make
it's moral subjectivism by culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I talked about that in the video where I talked through Passio's video. I think I mentioned that. You brought that distinction up, and I think I expounded on it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just to make sure that's clear to everybody, because I do see them get used interchangeably, and I think, they're synonymous enough that it's not a huge issue, but there is a difference. So for this kind of discussion, I think it's important to highlight that real quick. Not like the death of the essay or anything. If a social contract theory is going to work, it must be founded on facts, real features of human and social life. There must be enough generality and similarity so that the theory clearly reaches to everybody, not just a few. And it must make a prescription that makes rational sense to everybody. Everybody must be able to see why this prescription, this principle, is the way to go. Is this possible? We'll see. Social contract theory holds that morality, viewed rationally, is founded on, in some sense, agreement, or at least rational agreement. Agreement of the kind that any rational person can see reason to make. And this provides major resources for replies to skeptics and dissenters, if it works. If you agree that something or other is or would be right, then you are not in a position to turn around and deny it. I want to pause just for a second, because just to kind of give a window. This immediately raises a question with me, because I feel like this is going to be one of the biggest selling points of this whole thing, right? That there are agreements that all people, if they are thinking rationally, can come to, which I think is a hell of a claim to demonstrate. So that's like the first little red flag that pops up when I'm reading this. Do you have any comments before I go?
Yeah. What did you say was the first red flag? Say that again. I was reading comments.
That agreements of the kind that any rational person can see a reason to make.
Oh yeah.
So that there are claims that any person given an irrational mindset, which we would have to define in some category that is universalizable, can be made. So
which would be a hell of a feat. Yeah, that would be a hell of a feat.
Yeah.
The second part of that, though, where it says, and this provides major resources for replies to skeptics and dissenters. If you agree that something or other is or would be right, then you are not in a position to turn around and deny it. I use this constantly against subjectivists and consequentialists, because you can't hold that your behavior is going to be dictated by what you personally predict the outcome of your actions are going to be, and then resist when somebody else does the exact same thing. That is the self-contradictory nature of what I see in this sentence here. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Yeah, I just sent it in the sentence. Okay. We would have to distinguish between actual historical agreements typified by commercial contracts, treaties, and so on, and hypothetical agreements that one would make on reflection. And especially important, we must look for agreement in action. Anything merely done on paper or in words is of no interest unless it somehow bears on actual action and the disposition to act. Such an agreement obviously cannot be a sort of pan-human constitutional convention in which we all get together and sign some formal document. It can, however, be a recognition of an underlying rational structure. We come to agreement in action as the result of common sense appreciation of our condition. This is very important to contractarianism, so keep note of that. We come to agreement in action as the result of common sense appreciation of our condition. David Hume is the source of a great example. When two men row a boat, they fall into a rhythm and a level of effort that gets them going in one direction. No initial discussion and no contracting are necessary. As a widely recognized modern example, consider the rule of the road. When driving on a two-way street or road, keep to the right or the left, if that is the logically recognized rule. Here, the merit of following the rule is that we avoid the damaging or fatal collisions that we can otherwise expect. It is a merit that anyone can understand, and in actual conditions, virtually everyone virtually always adheres to, which sounds like that's a lot of conditions for that statement. Virtually everyone virtually always adheres to the rules of the road. There are the rare exceptions are discussable. Passing a slower vehicle, which is fine when it's safe. Then the question, is it safe in this case, becomes relevant.
He's starting to lose me.
That might be a matter of disagreement, but now there are clear criteria to appeal to in deciding it. We are not just at sea. Okay, so go ahead and vocalize. What are your disagreements so far?
There's a lot of subjectivity in this. In these past four sentences, and all of this, in my opinion, weakens his case. He started the paragraph out by branching, to use coder speak. He branched off of the nominal definition of social contract. This is the part where, your hackles that were raised when he said social contract should start to calm down, because you realize he's talking about something different than what most people are. When he says, where was it? The Constitutional Convention. Obviously, we can't have some sort of pan-human constitutional convention. And then he starts talking about recognition of a rational structure that underlies, that we can agree to, that virtually this group, virtually that group, virtually always, virtually most of the time, sometimes adheres to, except for the rare exceptions, which we can discuss, which are dependent on subjective evaluations of safety. So, like, this is when he starts to lose me, I think. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we were on the same page there. But yeah, there is, when you're just for anybody who wants to write this sort of essay in the future, if you're trying to make a case to exemplify your argument, you want the most poignant, direct, and with the least conditions as possible, because the more conditions that you add to your statement, the larger the potential is for one of those conditions to fail. Virtually everyone virtually always adheres to is like at least a billion right there, you know?
Well, like the way I pick apart this sentence when I read it is like when he says, it is a merit that anyone can understand. Anyone? That's the first question. And in actual conditions, virtually everyone, which I read as, and in actual conditions, some people don't have to always adhere to. Like, well, what are we saying now?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But I guess the only thing left to do is to read on, right? Where did I stop? That might be, yeah, I guess we'll start here. Yeah, because I did that. That might be a matter of disagreement, but now there are clear criteria to appeal to in deciding it. We are not just at sea. That's where I stopped. Another merit of the example is that it explains what can be relative, even though that doesn't upset the normative output. Interesting. What is relative is which side of the road we are going to drive on. Get a bunch of people together where they are driving or walking or horseback riding, and soon enough, you'll find them adhering to one side or the other. Once they do, it is irrational for a newcomer to go against the rule.
You gotta define what it means to be rational if you're going to use it as a foundation for your argument here.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a again, there's still a lot to read, but so far there's a bit of a temptation for me to say that there's almost no distinction between rational and conformative. If we were just to replace rational with conformative in each and every one of these circumstances, would it change the meaning of the passage? I don't know, at least not yet. A far more serious structure, which has come in for an immense amount of discussion in mathematical, social scientific, and philosophical circles for most of a century, is the now familiar prisoner's dilemma. In the two-person case that there are the norm in discussion, this little graph schematizes the idea. And there's a graph here that essentially goes through the rules of the prisoner's dilemma. I don't know, maybe we can show it on screen, but I'm just going to keep reading while he works on that. I'll skip over the parentheses that talks about the numbers just because it's not really that important. So A, we each face a choice between two alternatives, X and Y. And what happens to each of us depends on what we choose. If we choose alternative X, each of us gets his or her second best outcome. If we both choose Y, we both get the third best outcome, which is much worse for each. But if I choose X and you Y, I get my best and your worst. But if you choose X and I choose Y, then vice versa. We assume that we are both free agents choosing as we will. What do we do? The problem is that where we choose differently, one gains greatly at the expense of the other. So we choose the same, but which? In the absence of any sort of trust or further consideration, each is implied to choose the safer option. Why? This avoids the worst outcome. Fourth, yes. But the outcome for both of us, third, is much worse than the second, which we could have if only we could rely on the other to choose that way. That's the dilemma. Each of us goes for the best, and in doing so ends up badly in a way that could have been avoided. So this whole section, just because I know it was a little crazy with the diagram and whatnot, this whole section is basically trying to say that if we exclusively look out for our best interests, we're going to wind up screwing each other. So we have to think about both of our best interests in kind, assuming we know the outcomes of what's going to happen, and make a decision that way, because that way we both benefit from the decision that we made. Kind of like all of us deciding to stay on one side of the road instead of the other. We all benefit from making that rational choice, is what he's trying to get across here.
Yeah, it's when we cooperate, we become more than the sum of our parts. It's capitalism superpower. When we all specialize and get really good at small niches of skill sets and then cooperate with one another, we can get much farther and produce much more complex and valuable products than we could if we were all like personally, selfishly just doing our own thing.
Okay, so here's the reason I stopped is because I was kind of pseudo reading ahead, and this is the next big thing of this paper. Avoiding that worse outcome, says the contract theorist, is the object of morality. So the object of morality is, I just want to say that again, avoiding that worse outcome, which I think is interesting. We still don't have a subject yet, but so is it the worst outcome for both of us? Is it the worst outcome for one of us? We'll keep going. It tells us to cooperate rather than disagree, thus leading to better outcomes for us both. So now we have our subject.
The other bit of subjectivity in there is in whose judgment is which outcome worse for who. Like, I could disagree with you in saying that this outcome B is better or worse than what you think outcome B is better or worse. Like, in whose opinion, which is another layer of subjectivity that we got to watch out for here.
But remember, Patrick, we're both rational agents, so we have the same conception of what is good for us.
So we come to the same conclusions. Okay, so we're talking about humans that don't exist, those perfectly rational ones. That's a problem too. Like, we can't, I don't think it's valid to assume perfectly rational beings, is it?
I don't think it's rational either, but for the sake of his demonstration, that's what we were working with. So in his experiment, his thought experiment of the prisoner's dilemma, these perfectly rational beings should choose the outcome that's best for the both of them because they're both rational, have the same conceptions of what's good. See how it's kind of solves itself almost, right?
And what would you say, like, forget this article for a moment, what would you say is the object of morality?
What is the object of morality? I don't typically think about morality from a perspective of utility. I think it's a really dangerous way to look at it. I look at morality as limits rather than as a vehicle. And so what is the object of morality? I suppose the best way to, that's a really difficult question, which is one of the reasons why I like his sentence so much, because it's very brazen. I would say the object of morality is to limit moral injustices, which would mean limit undue moral authority. It sets boundaries on people for what they can and can't do in a rational context to each other. That's how we elevate out of the state of nature. Otherwise, we just perpetually live in the state of nature.
Well, I mean, what about happiness? Like the good old Aristotelian, the objective of morality and the study of the interaction of humans is to produce the most happiness.
The eudaimonia, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think elevating out of the state of nature is significantly more. This is not an empirical claim, but I personally believe subjectively that elevating out of the state of nature is preferable and would lead closer to eudaimonia than staying in it.
Oh, so yeah, we agree there. We don't disagree there. Yeah, just yeah. Okay. I was just wondering, so I guess the follow-up question is, you're saying, elevation out of the state of nature is the object? Is that what you said, first of all? And if so, why is that the object?
I think it's the only thing it can be. Risking potentially going astray from the conversation for just a little bit, I think attempting to use, like I've kind of stated it earlier, morality as a vehicle towards an end, whether that be happiness, whether that be agreement, or avoiding the worst outcome in this case, it encourages people to kind of see into morality a bit more than I think is actually there. And when you look at morality less as a vehicle to some sort of end with utility in and of itself, and you look at it as a restricting force with benefits, then I think you can start to see where the purpose of morality really is, and that is in curtailing unjust moral authority. I don't see anything outside of that. And that's kind of I don't think I've ever said that on camera before, actually. That's kind of a theory that I've been working more on, is boiling that down. But
I see it as behavioral hygiene might be a way I would describe it. So it's like we deny ourselves candy and we deny ourselves video game time to go and work out and to eat healthy. And as a reward of that sort of physical hygiene, we live longer, healthier, more comfortable physical lives. In terms of our behavioral hygiene, we need to find, the best possible, the optimal behavioral strategy to, again, I think, be happy, to live the longest, most fulfilling life. But again, this is subjective. I'm not making objective claims here. Like this is just. Yeah, that needs to be stated very clearly. I'm not saying objectively this is what morality is. I'm saying this is how I use this tool, this vehicle. I think I liked how you described it. Yeah, okay. Sorry for the digression. I just wanted to. Please continue.
No, yeah, and I think we agree significantly more than we disagree as far as like the subjective nature of virtue and it's important to us as people. I just want to make clear. I was trying to make the most objective I possibly could as far as like what the object of morality is. So, but yes, yeah, we agree significantly on the subjective portion of it. So, where did I stop?
Hold on. Outlaw Barber. Yeah. He's been in the comments for years now. When I talk about morality, referring to Passio's work. And it's very clear. The fingerprint of Passio is very clear in everybody. And this is not a knock. I'm just saying, anybody that ever has followed Passio and has ever reached out to me in any kind of comments, the words that they use are so verbatim from Passio. It's like super clear where you're getting this stuff. And I'm not knocking you. So like I'm just describing it. So Outlaw just said morality is behavior humans conduct. Based on human behavior, it has direct consequences in reality. If you cause harm, that is immoral. Wrong. If your behavior does not cause harm, that is moral. Right. So I can't tell you how many times people have copy-pasted that. And no, listen, I'm not trying to be disparaging at all. I appreciate Outlaw Barber just constantly advocating for the ideas that he thinks is right. I am not trying to be disrespectful. I would like to point out that is the point of disagreement between Passio and I. When he says, if you cause harm to a living being, that is immoral. And my question is, prove it. Where does the moral judgment come from in nature? You have to show that. You have to make that argument to connect reality to that moral judgment of wrong, harm being wrong, harm equals wrong. Why? Where? Where is the morality detector where I can get that conclusion, where I can extract that out of reality? It doesn't exist. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I would love for it to. I would love for somebody to show it to me. Show it to me. I hold that it doesn't exist. I have yet to see sufficient evidence to believe that. Sorry, yet another digression. We're never going to finish this. Please continue.
I'm just going to, the paragraph's short, and just so that it's fresh in everybody's brain, I'm just going to restart it. Avoiding that worse outcome in relation to the prisoner's dilemma, says the contract theorist, is the object of morality. It tells us to cooperate rather than disagree, thus leading to better outcomes for us both. Morality's rule is cooperation if the other party is willing to reciprocate. But if he doesn't, you are entitled to withdraw your cooperation. The prisoner's dilemma appears to be at work in innumerable situations in real life. And one very general case of it, the social contract theorist argues, is the most basic one of all. To see what it is and why it is important, we move to the great philosopher who, more than any other, has brought this kind of theory into prominence, Thomas Hobbes.
So the closest thing,
Supplemented-
when I sorry to interrupt, when I started out by saying that this philosophy is as close as you can get to what I talk about on this channel, it was that sentence. Morality's rule is cooperate if the other party is willing to cooperate or to reciprocate. But and I even say reciprocate, and I was saying reciprocate before I even read Narveson's work. So that is the closest point in the parallel lines. Maybe I don't think they're parallel, but we'll find out through reading this. But so he says morality's rule is cooperate if the other party is willing to reciprocate. But if he doesn't, you are entitled to withdraw your cooperation. That is the summary of everything I've been saying on this channel for 5 years. So, all right, please continue.
The problem concerns liberty, yours and mine, A's and B's. Liberty is the absence of interpersonal violence or coercion, more generally, of negative intervention. Intervention to worsen the life or situation of the person intervened upon. I just want to say real quick, I like the phrase negative intervention specifically more than coercion. It is a lot more abstract, but coercion has such a messy definition in public lexicon that it's like becoming more useless by the day, I feel.
Well, negative intervention could mean anything, though.
It is subjective, right? But I feel like it's a term that's easier to create a definition for than coercion, which has so much, like, people believe that like working for a wage is coercion nowadays. And they're like, oh, it fits into the definition here. And it's so polluted. It's difficult to use. I'm sorry for interrupting.
I'm not giving up on this hill. So like when he says liberty is the absence of interpersonal violence, I disagree. Because liberty includes interpersonal violence against people that initiate interpersonal violence. Like self-defensive violence is part of liberty. And that is interpersonal violence. So I'm nitpicking, I guess, but I disagree with this.
Okay. Maybe we can come back to that. Make a note of it.
Yeah, minor point. Please continue.
Yeah. We are at liberty of the social kind that is the subject of these chapters when no such negative intervention is threatened. Interesting. All right. I guess you're up. Next section.
All right. Hobbes.
Oh, do you have any closing thoughts for this section? I know we were kind of going at it the whole time, but
what was the title of the section? It was Social Contract as Normative Foundation. So far, I am not seeing a normative foundation. Are you?
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, I think the normative foundation has yet to be demonstrated. I think the possibility for a normative foundation given extra evidence has been laid, but that normative foundation hasn't been presented yet because of some of the issues that we've raised earlier.
ANCAP says or asks, is author a pacifist? No, I don't believe so. For the reason that we just said, right? When he said that morality is reciprocal agreement, basically. And if somebody doesn't reciprocate, then you don't have to respect it. That's self-defense. That's how I describe self-defense on this channel. Okay, so the section is called The Baseline Issue, States of Nature and Others. Wait, did I skip one?
Hobbes and the Natural Condition of Man?
Oh, this section's short. I better read 2 sections, otherwise this is going to be really unfair. All right. Okay. Hobbes and the Natural Condition of Mankind. If a social contract is to have much range of application, what is it about humans and their interactions that would make it so? That question has a general answer. On innumerable occasions in life, people might be able to gain at other people's expense. The most salient way is by actual physical violence. A hits B over the head and walks off with B's load of vegetables. And there are other ways, familiar to all, in which somebody can, quote, do someone else down. Lying, cheating, and defrauding are among the most important, and walk away with gains at his or her expense. What makes them so ubiquitous is a certain general similarity or comparability among people. Hobbes puts his finger on it when he asserts a sort of human equality, saying that, quote, as to strength of body, the weakest has enough to kill the strongest, end quote. As it can take very little strength to kill someone, what he says is obviously plausible. Only infants and the decrepit, or the severely disabled, or special local cases where one has the other in a corner, offer cases where that kind of equality doesn't pretty obviously hold. It is true that our relative levels of strength vary enormously, but it is almost never literally impossible for A to kill B if A is really determined to do so, especially now that we have 3D printable firearms. Yeah, Hobbes said that, right? Yeah, okay. That was in Hobbes' work. And in social situations, of course, we can make life miserable for certain other people, or even for a great many of them in many other ways. That's what's possible. But is it likely? Some reflection on this question is needed. Most of us nowadays live in a relatively safe social circumstances. And yet, even here and now, newspapers daily report violence by people near or far. Such violence occurs despite our living in societies with, usually, pretty good moral senses, and government agencies, notably the police, attempting to make the lives of the violent difficult as well. But what if we had neither of those? Neither governments with laws and police nor people brought up to be decent and civil. Hobbes' claim to the theoretician's fame is very strong, though the relation of his actual arguments to the more fundamental game theoretical reasoning of contemporaries is inferential and conjectural, of course, rather than explicit. Because game theory didn't come into existence as a formal study until the mid-20th century. The nub of the matter is this. Hobbes, appealing strictly to individual deliberative practical reason, and in a quite uncontroversial understanding of reason, develops a picture of how things would be in the absence of the state. Awful, he holds. He then asserts a, quote, law of nature, with a number of subordinate laws, which should count as theorems rather than further laws, since he claims plausibly that all the latter ones follow from the first one, according to which rational men will seek peace. Yeah, you can really tell this is a philosopher writing this, right? Just super nerdy. However, in the absence of the state, he argues, peace will be unavailable. So, rational men will create the state, granting authority to a government whose laws will then inherit the authority of the law of nature. It's a brilliant idea if it works. Whether it works, and if not, then what, if anything, might work instead, is the question.
Yeah, so this is just real quick on this section. This is basically just the skinny on the Leviathan. If you wanted the 2-page summary of the Leviathan, you basically got it. It's there are no natural born tyrants, and therefore anybody can kill anybody. So without someone there to be the tyrant, the Leviathan in this case, we'll just kill each other constantly. So we need that. So it is very his foundation is very utilitarian in that respect, that we need a social contract, not so much that a social contract is something that already exists. Sort of like what we were talking about earlier, the elevation out of the state of nature. Hobbes' only way to see this happen is to create a Leviathan.
To create a government. To force people up. Right? Yeah. That's kind of the difference in perspective. Yeah. And I have the Leviathan now, and it's a long book, but I might do a Let's Read and just read it on the channel to further reduce my subscriber count. But, it's good. So it's good for me. It's not about you. It's not about y'all. So Hobbes' state of nature is very close to what I talk about when I mean state of nature. It's probably the same thing, basically. It's the absence of any sort of moral truth. It's animal on animal interaction. Might makes right. Subjective, morally subjective, personal goal based decision making, like blind to anything else, not caring for other people or what's right and wrong. It's just acting in, whatever base instinct or, heat of the moment idea that you had. That's the state of nature. That's how animals interact. And then just to reiterate, to get out of the state of nature, he thinks we need a government, and he describes it in the Leviathan, and it's how you sort of force people to reciprocate moral agreements. And what I argue for is sort of the anarchist version of that. It's like there are people, whether or not you have a government, there are people that will choose to reciprocate rights with you, and there are people that will not. I call these good and bad guys, moral and immoral people, good and evil people. And I choose to associate with the ones that choose to reciprocate with me, absent any coercion. Like, I'm going to trust somebody that was coerced into reciprocating rights with me way less than somebody who does it voluntarily. Anyway, so let's continue. The baseline issue, states of nature and others. If we are to deal with one another in the game theorist's way, we need to reckon with our gains and losses from some point of departure. If we think in terms of a grand social theory, one that shows how morality derives or perhaps evolves from a previous condition in which it did not obtain, then the natural thought is to start with the natural condition of mankind as the state of nature. This is the Hobbes, that's the whole core Hobbesian definition of the state of nature, which is the natural condition of mankind. It's just, like a dude standing on an island, in his, I don't know, next to his
nothing
fire pit. In his underwear,
stack
whatever.
of coconuts.
Yeah, stack of coconuts. Oh, I want to play it. I don't want to overuse that, but I want to play it. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to resist. Okay. Okay, I'm going to play it.
So personally, I would say no, it's not immoral for the person to ask for their dick to be sucked in exchange for the coconuts.
Oh, man. Oh.
Man.
It was apropos to this discussion. You were talking about the state of nature. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Very true.
That was a valid use. All right. All right. Okay. So then the natural thought is to start with the quote national condition.
We're already breaking down.
I know. All right. So the natural thought is to start with the quote natural condition of mankind. Hobbes' words, which we now normally rephrase as the state of nature. What Hobbes very famously claims is that in this natural condition, people will perceive that they have no protection against the violence of others, and will turn it to themselves in self-defense if nothing else. And we will thus have the terrible condition he describes as a war of all against all. What I say about the state of nature and recognizing that you exist in it is that that's a good thing, where you realize that it's up to you to defend yourself, and that no rights and no government and no police force and none of this constitution magic paper nonsense actually serves to protect you. That's on you, and it's on you to make good friendships and associations with the people around you that reciprocate rights with you to strengthen your ability to defend yourself. So I think it's a good thing to recognize the reality of our situation. History favors the bold, Christian Garrett Moore, says Adam. Okay. Several questions arise about this idea, of which two are especially pertinent here. First, the phrase, quote, natural condition of mankind could refer to a hypothetical historical condition. If so, which condition? We can discuss that in tandem with the second question. Is the of nature component specifically political, as Hobbes tends to treat it, or is it moral? The correct answers to these questions I will here suggest are that the condition in question need not be historical, and that it must be moral rather than specifically political. To explain. If the idea was to tell a sort of universal history of prehistorical man, then the Hobbesian project runs into heavy weather. For anthropologists overwhelmingly agree that most primitive human communities do not have governments, strictly speaking. And yet, contra Hobbes, they do have rudimentary moralities, and moreover are predominantly peaceable. Locke, in short, is more nearly correct than Hobbes. To argue for the necessity of government as the needed specific remedy, the case must be refined, as by George Klosko, and will be controversial. But the argument can be reformulated in a much more powerful and fundamental way. We can imagine, without having to theorize very much, how social life might be if we were devoid of any sense of morality. As Hobbes puts it, quote, the notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have there no place, end quote. He does indeed go on to say, quote, where there is no common power, there is no law. Where no law, no injustice. It is consequent also to the same condition that there be no propriety, no dominion, no mine and thine distinct, but only that to be every man's that he can get, and for so long as he can keep it. And so what he meant by mine and thine is no property rights, no understanding of property, no ownership, no dominion. That's another way of saying ownership. Propriety, property. So do you have anything you want to say on that before we continue?
Yeah, so this is where I disconnect the most with Hobbes. It's pretty funny. I agree with his super pessimistic view on the nature of man as far as the state of nature is concerned. But then I disagree with the fact that he's like, well, then without a common power, we can't have any of these things. And I think that's where the biggest distinction comes from for the side of a cooperation, which I think is kind of what we're going to be leaning towards more in this paper, is that it doesn't necessarily change anything to have a common power versus intentional cooperation or consensual cooperation is what I meant to say there. It's the same outcome in these cases. So Hobbes jumps the gun a little bit, in my opinion, in stating that without the Leviathan, we can't have anything like these. But I do agree that in a state of nature, without any agreements and without anything at all, there are no property rights. There is no dominion, no mine and thine distinct. I think that's very true.
Yeah. So the disagreement was definitely all in the first sentence, or the first half of the first sentence, where he says that without common power, there's no morality, effectively.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping and suspecting that the rest of this chapter will go on to disagree with Hobbes on that piece of that paragraph. So, all right. So that was the end. That was end quote from Hobbes, and we're back to Narveson here. But note that those inferences are not consequent, as Hobbes has it, of the natural condition. They are rather a definition of that condition. We are not surmising how things might be, but drawing attention to certain familiar features of social life that we can, with effort, imagine away, and then plausibly see that such a social condition would be so difficult to imagine as to be all but impossible. The, quote, natural condition is that in which no widely recognized social rules as yet exist. And what would be the problem? Here, Hobbes puts his finger on it. The basic problem is violence. It is certainly not the absence of a state, with its infinite further potential for more violence. People can often gain, or suppose they can gain, by taking advantage of others, taking their possessions or their very lives to serve our own purposes. How are we to prevent such things? The beginning of an answer, at least, is to adopt rules. Literally, to rule them out. Instead of evaluating our actions purely in terms of their likelihood of advancing our ends, we instead ask what our fellows have reason to put up with from us, and we from them. And to this, Hobbes has a brilliantly simple answer. We are to go for peace, not war. The methods of war, violence, are to be reserved for defense against those who refuse to respect others. All else is peace, which is simply the absence of war. All right, your turn.
Yeah, cool. Any closing comments for that section? I think we pretty much aired everything out.
Yep.
Yep, cool. Let me get my dog off the bed. 1 second. Sorry,
I'm having a blast. And you know what I love? I love that, like the 12 people watching this right now enjoy this too. Like, thank you for being the type of people that are into the nerdy philosophy. That is what this channel really has always been about, and what I want it to be about is figuring out the philosophy and then applying it to life through some sort of activism, either through just living better or actually going out and doing good in the world. Thank you for being here, guys. You guys are awesome. All right.
Yes,
I'm not
indeed.
changing the channel, so if you don't like it, I mean, die mad, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. Go ahead.
That's a community guideline strike.
Is this how you build a successful channel? I don't know. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, man. I need a shirt that says that. Die mad. Okay. The here and now. What's going on here? And especially, how does this apply, not in the hypothetical vacuum we've imagined, but in daily life now? Although this is a question leading to many complications, there is still a relatively plausible and straightforward way of working out the implications of Hobbes' idea. First, we are not in the primitive state of nature. We confront each other against the background of much that we agree on. In the here and now, we will face roughly two sorts of people. A, peaceable ones who are ready to respect the lives, persons, liberties, and properties of others. And B, people who are ready to invade and despoil, to use Hobbes's colorful language. That is
That's a
to
t-shirt.
cheat, lie. Yeah.
I need to make a t-shirt right now. Sorry, go ahead.
That is to cheat, lie, steal, and perhaps inflict physical wounds or even death in order to get their way. What do we do about the latter? How do we behave towards the former? Answering the second question is easy. They respect our persons, we respect theirs. The first three Hobbesian laws say, essentially, 1, don't make war on the peaceable, but be peaceable in return, and do feel entitled to counter violence with defensive measures, possibly including violence in return. 2,
Don't start none, won't be
reserve-
none. That was rule number 1.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Don't reserve liberties for yourself that you won't grant to others. So insofar as we have agreed rules among us, do what those rules call for. And insofar as we don't, then seek out those with whom you would like to cooperate more substantially than just by refraining from killing or damaging them, and work out the agreements you want. Thus, for example, we can buy and sell in the marketplace, stores, real estate, and all the myriad services of modern life where we can pay our money and take our choices. Here, it is a matter of understanding the terms and living up to them. And so, by the way, I think that's a really good one as well.
Well,
Just kind of what we were talking about earlier, but
pay our money and take our choice is Tanstaffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, and take what you want and pay for it, which are both great quotes from The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. If you guys have not read that, it's by Heinlein. You need to go get the audiobook right now. It's one of the best books, one of the best fictions ever. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Sorry, please continue.
3, in general, we are to keep our agreements when we make them. Note that there is no requirement to make any particular agreements. There is only the fundamental one that makes social life possible, as already sketched, the first law calling for peace. But if we do make a given arrangement with someone else, then we do have duties. We owe it to that person that we fulfill the terms, and the person owes it to us to do what has been agreed to. The second and third laws can be shown to be deducible from the first, but we won't pause to go through the exercise here. These are all precepts. Oh yeah, go ahead.
The reason why I think these 3 rules are the bedrock of where I get out of bed with philosophy is because anything less than these 3 things is the absence of anything. It's the state of it's normal reality. It's just the bare metal nature, dog eat dog, lion eats gazelle world. Anything less than this is the bare minimum. This is the bare metal where we begin elevating, like I say, elevating ourselves out of the state of nature, getting out of bed with moral philosophy. All right.
Yeah, something I should have commented on that I don't know if he states super clearly here, and it could just be like an interpretation thing. He notes, first, we are not in the primitive state of nature. We confront each other against the background of much that we agree on. And then he goes to list people who don't do those things, confront each other against the background. To me, that just kind of shows that, the archetypical state of nature and what the state of nature actually is don't necessarily have to be the same thing. I think it's totally acceptable that we live in the state of nature and choose to live above it. Like the state of nature is the base level of reality, and it is kind of a permanent existence as long as living beings exist on Earth to interact with each other. So
it is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know whether he's stating that we don't live in a state of nature or that the state of nature isn't here anymore or what exactly, but I just wanted to make that clear just in case.
Yeah. Agreed.
These are all precepts that are not normally difficult to interpret in modern life, with one very big class of exceptions, the laws of the state that we live in. Now here, the problem is that we did not agree in any detail to the vast majority of them, and indeed don't even know more than a tiny fraction of the thousands of laws our various levels of government have passed. When the power of the state has been employed to create a certain institution or set of ways of doing things, and we see serious defects and problems in the system it has worked out, well, what now? For by far most of us, most of the time, that's just a weird sentence, that issue is dealt with by knuckling under, sucking it up, and accepting provisionally the laws as they are in order to keep the authorities away, so far as possible, from our door. But clearly, we cannot, as Hobbes did, simply go along with the state's rules as if they were due to an agreement that we had already made with particular people to select one person or small group of persons as the ruler, the authority on all details of our lives, followed by lifelong subordination to his decrees. The moral status of the state is rendered a huge problem by its ambiguous status. Many, of course, talk as though what the laws of one state say to do is actually morally right. One can be forgiven for wondering whether those who say this have actually thought it through. We look at Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia.
They haven't.
Pre-civil rights Alabama, and then into the myriad of problematic cases in modern life. And we can hardly swallow the Hobbesian dictum that what the government says is, in effect, truly law, truly has the forces of Hobbes' law of nature. Like,
wait,
I don't know what that's supposed to
mean. Does Hobbes actually say that government law becomes the law of nature?
It's a force directly derived from the law of nature. He says we wouldn't have agreed to it if it didn't derive from the law of nature, because the law of nature is what we all, as rational people, seek, right? There's kind of a, Hobbes's prescriptions leave a lot to be desired, but
okay.
Like H blank blank blank, it does. Oh, like hell. Oh, okay. Sorry, okay. My bad. For the Christian audience out there, cover your ears. Like hell it does. Must be our reaction. But because we do live here, and because so many people do follow those rules, we by and large have to live with those rules and complain as best we can in letters to the editors, books and papers, public meetings, and so forth. Voting, yeah. Yep. Those of us, that is, who live in the better contemporary states where we can do such things without serious consequences, such as jail terms or being poisoned by an agent of the government, and of course, vote in elections in hopes of improving things.
So personally,
Oh, is it just, it's going to keep playing? Oh, okay. I need to trim that one down a little bit. Jesus. All right. Sorry, go ahead.
This short excursion on the state is simply intended to illustrate why there is a clear answer to our question of the status and character of any fundamental agreement. It is moral, not necessarily political. It underlies is antecedent to legislation and edict. I think it makes a lot of salient claims in this, just because I know I didn't stop a lot, but there isn't like a ton, I feel like, prescriptions in this particular section. He's more just so describing kind of what he's already talked about.
Yeah.
But I do think it's hilarious that, he's like, I wonder how many people have ever actually thought about this. It's pretty funny.
Like hell it does.
Hippies? We're not hippies. We're libertarians.
All right. The circumstances of justice. Let's now go back to basics once more and ask, what is it about human life that makes the Hobbesian laws of nature so plausible as a set of rules for social living? This question is answerable in general, and Hobbes and his successor Hume have worked out the answers with power and clarity. They are as follows. Number 1. The only possessors of rational decision-making powers via deliberation are individual persons. Each person proceeds in the light of his or her own perceived interests or values, for present purposes, the terms are the same, and powers. So let me read that again without the parentheses. Each person proceeds in the light of his or her own perceived interests and powers. We choose among the options in action that our bodies, environments, and social circumstances make available on the basis of our perceived, felt desires or interests, and try to do our best by them. Number 2, those interests and powers are enormous... Wow, I just lost the ability to speak entirely. Those interests and powers are enormously variable from one to another. The powers, crucially, typically include sufficient strength and will to inflict serious injuries on just about any of our fellows, along with much else. And our interests, given both our power and our environmentally available options, are such as to sometimes lead us into at least tentative conflict with at least some others. I lost the plot of that number 2. What was that?
Yeah, there's a lot of prescriptions baked into this. Basically, all he's saying is that the interests and powers are very different between people. That's essentially the whole point of this. We don't all agree on everything.
Thanks for that paragraph saying that. Number 3, we are all dependent on our physical environments for food, warmth, insulation from extreme heat, and clean air at a minimum. Especially the requirements of sustenance and rough ambient temperature control can be met only by eating enough of a certain range of organic material for... This is what philosophers do that pisses me off so bad. Like, he's spending 3 sentences to say humans need food and shelter. Done. Humans need food and shelter. 5 words and a period. Instead, you get this paragraph. We are all dependent on our physical environments for food, warmth, insulation from extreme heat, and clean air at a minimum, especially the requirements of sustenance and rough ambient temperature control can be met only by eating enough of a certain range of organic material from time to time and by fashioning clothing of some sort of shelter. Nature doesn't take care of those requirements on its own. Our exertions and cognitive involvement are needed as well. No wonder nobody listens to us.
Well, hey, I'd like to say, I forgot to say this in the beginning. The purpose of this essay is to be communicative, less so than demonstrative. So there is, if this was a purely like analytic, we'll say academic, just for context sort of paper, it would be like, environment, we need these things we're dependent on are D, and then they would build out a logical tree of like functional claims from D instead of saying, the range of organic material, instead of all that. So there is a lot of rhetoric flower in this essay is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it makes it so difficult for people to get into philosophy. Anyway. The requirements can lead humans into conflict, where, as Hobbes puts it, we both desire the same thing that we cannot both have. In parentheses, have enough of to keep us content. This is what it is to say that resources are scarce. Crucially, however, our environmental situation is such that the human input to resources enables us with suitable levels of cooperation, if available, to expand supply to overcome these scarcities. Yeah. We can work to produce more, is what he said. Scarcity, in other words, is not fixed and zero-sum, but amenable to more or less control at the hands of humans, especially to cooperating ones. We can cooperate to produce more. Okay.
Yeah. We need
4.
things. Things are scarce. If we work together, we can have those things.
Yes. We need stuff. We can make stuff. And when we work together, we can make extra stuff.
Yep.
Number 4. All humans probably have some sympathies with others. Most have relatively... Now we're just taking shots at this. This is... Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, guys.
No, it's funny. Number 4. Although all humans probably have some sympathies with others, most have relatively limited sympathy. When push comes to shove, we cannot expect people routinely to love their neighbor. Number 5. And finally, morality is not natural either. At the least, not of sufficient natural power to cope with the potential difficulties stemming from the first 4 conditions. I think he's saying with number 5, if morality it is woven into the fabric of reality, it's not sufficiently woven into the fabric to be powerful enough to actually protect and provide for the conflict that arises from people needing stuff to live.
Yeah. There is no constitution jumping up and defending your rights, is basically, yeah.
Okay, these together show us that humans have something to gain from peaceable cooperation and much to lose without it. Condition 3, especially, given the others, leads us to the brink of war or peace. Which way shall we go? Hobbes, mankind in general, and libertarians in particular say peace is the way to go. The output is negative. Seek peace simply means don't aggress, don't use violence. More generally, don't seek to make yourself better off by making some other people worse off. You may do that only if those people have already done something to merit defensive action by you. Conversely, this fundamental rule does not immediately direct us to feed the starving, help the needy, or rescue the endangered. Whether and why those are things we ought to do are a matter for further inquiry, but whether we ought to kill people whenever it serves our interests is not a further item. What a weird way to say that. Don't keep that on your list of options is indeed to head us down the road to the war of all against all. That we may make war on the warlike is rational. Making war on the peaceable, however, is another matter. Even if it seems rational to do it, it is clearly not rational to subscribe to a general morality that allows it. Note that contractarians are not saying that all rational persons will always be nice guys. We are saying that it is rational for people to publicly accept and support a general program of... Oh God, here we go. I'm going to start over because this addresses one of the very first things that we were worried about in this chapter, or in this article. Note that contractarians are not saying that all rational persons will always be nice guys. We are saying that it is rational for people to publicly accept and support a general program of approval of the peaceable and disapproval of the warlike.
Isn't this kind of a consensus fallacy? Like, we're stating that, oh, a lot of people prefer this, was kind of what we were building up to here. There's a lot to gain from it, so there's utility. So we already have consensus and utility. So therefore it is rational. Does that necessarily follow?
I think you're trying to make his argument for him. He didn't make the argument. He just stated it. I think he's got a baseless assertion here. We're saying that it's rational for people to publicly accept and support a general program of... Let me summarize. He's saying it's rational for people to not attack each other and to be disapproving of people that want to attack, bad people, violent people. But he hasn't proven that. Why is it rational? Has he? I haven't seen it if he has.
I don't know. Let's keep going. Maybe he'll expand on that more before I make any damning commentary, I suppose.
Before you hit him with the guillotine? Okay. The mark of acceptance is this. I feel it coming. The guillotine is here. It's looming. The mark of acceptance is this. The mark of acceptance of this is, first, that we live up to it by being peaceable, and second, that we preach what we practice, encouraging others to be peaceable as well. Morality is partly action and partly promotion of an agenda, a program of public education, inculcation.
What?
Social contract proposes to identify a uniquely rational view of morality, one based on individual practical reason reacting to the fact of social life. I think the article falls in this paragraph.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of head nodding all the way up until this point, and now I'm kind of doing the head cocking instead. Social contract proposes to identify a uniquely rational view of morality, one based on individual practical reason reacting to the fact of social life. What is the fact of social life? The fact, that's the word I have problem with. Like, are we talking fact of social life in the context of the world? Because I can tell you that's one hell of a jump to make. A country, even. I mean, think about just region to region, city to city, how much social norms can change.
I'm trying to steal them, right? I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and not just like pick apart. So like, what's the strongest argument we could make for a fact of social life? Well, we are humans that to really survive have to interoperate with other people. So at a minimum, we have a social life in that we have to trade to live. But even that is temporal, because it would be possible for us to farm by ourselves on an island and live. So, I guess
this is so.
I don't know. I can't make
the social life part. Maybe it would be something, and we'll say 99.9% of people will constitute a fact. All right. I don't think this holds up to extreme deduction, but just for the sake of steel manning, if we were to say that, then in social interaction, I believe it to be fair to say that 99.9% of humanity would like to leave all social interactions alive. So that would be we would do individual practical reasoning based on that fact. 99.9% of humans want to leave all social interactions alive.
Yeah.
So that would be we don't murder people. Essentially, would be what we would derive from that as through practical reasoning. Okay.
So yeah, I disagree with it less thinking about it in those terms. Morality is partly action and partly promotion of an agenda, a program of public education inculcation. I guess if we're promoting,
that's been conflated.
I mean, I think it's bad words, but like that's what I do. Like I try and say, hey, I'm looking for people out there in the world to reciprocate rights with me, property rights, and I'm teaching people an agenda of how to live their life by reciprocating rights with people and attacking people that attack you. This is public education. We want to spread this agenda as far as we can, right? I'm trying to steel man him and not just,
you're okay. Yeah,
shit on his words, right?
Okay.
So, yeah. So is that part of morality? I don't know. I guess that's subjective. I don't really care. Yeah. Meh.
Yeah. Right. I think that steel man didn't really connect with me.
Yeah. Okay.
But let's see. Paper's not over. He's still got the last paragraph. He could convince us. Oh, didn't you just go? I can go. Oh, you know what? You can take it if you want.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Doesn't matter. Okay.
Self and other regarding interests. Terrible section name. Self and other regarding interests. Oh, other regarding. So self-regarding and other regarding. What? This is a terrible section name. All right.
Steelman it. It's great. It saves characters and ink. Steelman. Sorry.
The social contract theory is usually characterized as basing morality on self-interest. That is a misunderstanding, and an important but also understandable one. Rational action consists in choosing the best means to one's own overall set of ends indeed. But among those ends, are all of them exclusively concerned with the agent's own benefit? Certainly not. Typically, as has long been recognized, e.g. by Bishop Joseph Butler, we have interests in various other persons, especially loved ones, such as a spouse and children, but also friends, fellow workers in favored causes, and more. Indeed, people are often ready to make major sacrifices, including even of their very lives, for those persons. The idea that rationality as such is self-interested in the sense that words like selfish conjure up is quite mistaken. What is not mistaken is that our interests are ours. A does not act in order to promote B's interests or C's, but A's, even if A in fact chooses to promote the interest of B or C. That is the element of truth in the characterization. He's saying that altruism doesn't exist, which I tend to agree with. Even when you're acting to help other people. Right. Even when you're acting to help other people, you're doing that out of self-interest because it makes you happy to help other people. That's Ayn Rand's, egoist position. Yeah.
Yeah.
But social contract calls on us to adopt principles that would be acceptable to everyone, not just to oneself. And for that reason, morality cannot be devoted to any one person or proper subset of persons, such as the adherence of a particular religious outlook. And since any proposal by one person to promote the good of another would be contingent on that other's agreement, insofar as it figures as a moral requirement, the elements of regard for others in particular persons' outlooks do not affect the overall result. I need to translate that through normal talk. Hold on. And since any proposal by one person to promote the good of another would be contingent on the other's agreement, insofar as it figures as a moral requirement, the elements of regard for others in particular persons' outlooks do not affect the overall result. That was a nothing burger sentence to my brain. Let me know if you get anything out of that.
People have to agree to interact with each other because of the moral stuff we talked about earlier.
Why does somebody have to agree for me to do something to promote the good of another? I don't get that.
I don't know. I mean,
okay.
I guess if you got them food, they could say no. You know, I mean.
Okay. Just as I cannot simply give you a certain gift without your acceptance, so I cannot include you as a beneficiary of some provision in the social contract unless you're prepared to accept it. Oh, okay. So he's talking about
talking about it from the reverse.
The government gives you roads, you didn't consent to it, so you're not obligated to pay for it. I think is maybe where he's going with it, right?
Well, doesn't he switch from giver to receiver in this, though? I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just nitpicking at this point. But
hopefully this clears up the issue about self-interest, but it does raise a different and very important question, that of motivation. The question is, why would I accept a moral requirement that might sometimes require me to sacrifice some interest of mine? It is here that the social contract scores over all other theories about the foundations of morals. I accept such a requirement because if I don't, you and others will be at liberty to disregard it in your behavior toward me. If I feel free to murder you, then you are free to murder me. Am I ready to accept that implication? Not likely. It is important that the answer could conceivably be yes. Every theory has to face the prospect that some people will claim to have no use for morality. With those people, all we can say is that we, the rest of mankind, are in principle at war with them. I love this language. I'm going to start this paragraph over. Very well said. I'm going to start it over. It is important that the answer could conceivably be yes. Every theory has to face the prospect that some people will claim to have no use for morality. With those people, all we can say is that we, the rest of mankind, are in principle at war with them, because they, after all, are at war with us. We can hope, and often really expect, that we will make life worse for such people. Social contract respects all interests that are compatible with the pursuit by others of their interests as well. Thus, and only thus, do we all get along and progress as a community. All right. Value pluralism. Do you want me to continue, or do you want to... Oh, no, this is the same section, isn't it? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Value pluralism and the social contract. People differ. See, now he's saying simple sentences. That was good. Good job. He could have made that way complicated. People differ. They differ in their physical and mental makeup, and that difference includes the particular profiles or complexes of values that they are inclined to pursue. This is what value pluralism, recognition of the diversity of values among people. This is value pluralism. It is often called moral pluralism, but that expression is ambiguous. The basic social contract is not plural, but unitary. The same for all. That is its point. Hold on. The basic social contract is not plural, but unitary, the same for all. That is its point. It does not permit a variety of conflicting moral requirements. On the other hand, the lifestyles, practices, tastes, and pursuits of people, their philosophies of life, are indeed plural, and they are precisely what morality does permit. In a sense, we each have one such profile, a distinct, particular profile unique to the individual. To illustrate the point, your hunger is a desire for food in your stomach, not mine, even if the particular kind of food we desire is exactly the same. But of course, it is usually different in that way, too. Social contract is designed to accommodate the widest possible array of interests compatible with the pursuits of everyone else. Thus, for example, the tolerance for diverse sexual behaviors or religious beliefs, and so much else, for which liberalism in general is noted, is part and parcel of the outlook of social contract. And that, in fact, is the source of its universality. Everyone has the same requirement: to refrain from compelling his or her fellows to conform to any particular lifestyle, religion, or whatever other element of values that individual is interested in. We may attempt to persuade by argument or by example, but we may not force others to do things our way. So this social contract that he's talking about has one rule. It's basically the NEP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was going to be my commentary. I agree with the overwhelming majority of that. Actually, most of it. It's just a lot of it was written in an interesting manner. Political or moral? As was noted earlier, the social contract tradition has mostly been expounded in specifically political terms. All of us, on that account, agreed to accept one government, a monarch in most versions until recently, and to live in accordance with that government's requirements. But then the question arises, are you sure you'd want to go along with that ruler? Do we accept Adolf Hitler's rules? It is surely obvious that this is questionable in the extreme. Not just government, but good government is surely what we'd choose if we had our choice. Do we? That's actually a puzzle. See more below. And that choice implies that we have some criteria for good government. What is a government supposed to be trying to do that would make it choice-worthy? Any answer to that has to be a moral answer. We will all agree that what governments are for is this or that. Once we see that's what the choice has to be about, it becomes obvious that social contract must be viewed in moral terms rather than necessarily or specifically in political terms.
I bet that sounded better in his head.
Yeah.
Like when he was, yeah, go ahead.
That's what, yeah. It is a logically open question whether, in the words of Thoreau, what that government is best that governs not at all. Government, if it is to be legitimate, must respect our rights. It is not the source of those rights. At base, instead, it is, if it's doing its job, obligated to protect them for all of us. That was a short section. I can do the next one. Morality. In order to determine whether government is moral, we first have to understand what the concept of morality entails. I feel like this section should have been earlier, but maybe that's just me. Morality, rational and otherwise. So what is morality? There are several types of answers to this rather ambiguous question. First, of course, morality is a social phenomenon. Yes. It is a community set of generally accepted and generally imposed behavior controls. People address one another's actions and respond verbally and otherwise.
That was ad populum. Sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah. Along certain general lines, varying from one community to another. He's essentially taking a directly moral relativist take here. Mm-hmm. Like morality is what the people agree morality is.
Yeah. Subjectivist. Not a relativist, just to dig on your distinction earlier, right?
But well, he specifies it as a community.
You're right.
Set. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
My correction stands corrected. Please continue.
Second, morality may be thought of as a set of rules, requirements, and principles expressed as such and such is right, or you are to do so and so. Where you is essentially everyone, and the people, the we, who make the assessments and deliver the commands are likewise also pretty much everyone. However, We want to use the sense of morality as that set of rules or principles, if any, that passes the test of reason. Interesting. That set of rules or principles, if any, that passes the test of reason. The philosophically best such set, the philosophically best such set, rather than just any old set that people may happen to have. Oh, okay. So he's basically saying using rationalization to come up with this morality, I'm assuming.
He just said the whole thing is complicated as one could possibly imagine saying it. We want to use the rules that are the most rational. Ta-da.
Yeah. And here, best is, we hope, thought of as true, were it not that the applicability of the notion of truth is one of the questions philosophers discuss at length in their reflections on the subject of morals. But all we need to mean is this: a true or right morality is the one that all rational individuals can accept as the general canon for regulating interpersonal relations.
That is that is an unattainable standard, practically speaking, if nothing else. Like I don't like this rational. Rand does the same thing. She appeals to the rational man as the arbiter of truth, when I'm not sure there is such a thing like a perfect Platonic rational man. I don't know of any of those in reality that actually exist.
Yeah. Okay. Clearly, social contract, like the other prominent theories of the subject, is mainly an entry in the third category. Every moral philosopher supposes that the favored set of precepts he or she endorses is also found, at least in some measure, in actual practice. Does he mean to say sound? I don't know. But in view of the diversity of moralities among human communities, this supposition can hardly be maintained in a very thorough way. Social contract, if I and my predecessors in this vein are right, will be reflected very widely in almost all communities, even if such moralities are found along with accretions whose credibility we may have our doubts about. So it kind of sort of will, but it might not.
But it'll have some extra stuff that might not be super rational, I think is what he meant. Like community to community, some communities are going to have some of their, it's going to be fundamentally based in this sort of rational social contract theory, but from community to community, you're going to have some that have some bad dingleberries, moral dingleberries attached.
Oh, sorry, I was reading ahead. Every community disapproves of sheer murder.
False.
Don't think that's true. Yeah. Even while practicing stoning of premarital lovers or women who expose more than 2 inches of ankle and so on. I don't see how that follows. Like there are communities
if murder is
that those actions.
It follows only if murder is defined as that which the community decides is murder, not murder in an objective sense. That's the only way that works.
Just full-blown relativism at that point.
So every community disapproves of what they think is murder. Well, that is a fucking meaningless sentence. Okay.
Every community disapproves of lying and cheating, even though its leaders lie and cheat extensively. So he's trying to say that these people actually, this reminds me kind of the intuitionists. It's like these people actually believe that murder is wrong, but they murder, knowing it's wrong. They do the stoning and stuff, and they know that lying and cheating is bad, even though they let their leaders do it. That's interesting. Much of everyday morality, especially when we move very far from the philosopher's home, doesn't fare too well at the court of reason. But this observation doesn't mean that moral theory is either pointless or impossible. Rational criticism is possible and important.
Let me
Better
catch up
for everyone.
Before you start the next section. Let me catch up on comments here. We have a few.
Actually, can I take my dog out while you're doing that? Because he's been whining for a few minutes. Yeah, Be right back.
All right, Outlaw Barber. When you get the chance, Patrick, watch Demystifying the Occult series 1 through 3 by Mark, and the Natural Law series will make way more sense. Send me a link, man. If nothing else, we might watch it in Discord sometime. Rick, I want to look like this thing is happening with Mark Passio right now with me, where I commented on one of his videos that he produced recently. And as happens every time I broach a specific topic on the channel, a bunch of people come out and want to have continuing conversations or even debates on the subject. And what it turns into is like a month of my channel is devoted to like one specific thing. Like it was abortion when I made the case that, you know, all abortion is murder, or the sort of irrationality of moral veganism. Like there was like a month-long sort of obsession on the channel for that. And that's good. Like that's what I'm asking for. Like when I bring up these topics, I'm asking you guys to participate in a two-way discussion with me. I just want to all this is to say, I just want to make sure that if we're going to, you know, take on an obsession with critiquing Mark Passio's work for the next month or two, I want to make sure that this is still couched in terms of respectful philosophical discussion, and that nobody thinks that I'm specifically trying to like go out of my way to bash Passio. That's all I'm saying. Like, I'm up for the conversation. I'm always up for good conversations, and we can stay on Passio stuff as long as we want. I just don't want people to think that this channel is all about like hit pieces on random people from time to time. Let's see. Rick Russell, violence should only be used in self-defense. Overpopulation creates its own challenges. Matt says, hello, nerd chat.
What's up, nerd chat?
Guy with Greek name, I think that's JD, maybe that's JD. What's up? Good to see you. The Amish in Oklahoma have a good live and let live policy, says Outlaw Barber. And if you don't like the rules of the community, you're free to leave. They are pacifist, though, which is detrimental for safety.
I came in at the end of the comment that you were making about Passio and the critiques and whatnot, and I just wanted to say that Narveson and I could live in a community, and I'm almost certain would never have any issues because we would respect each other's property rights in our person and everything. So any of the critiques that are made should be, you know, that should be well aware, is that I don't have any issues with this person, and I think we would live just fine with each other. We're just having philosophical nerdy chat. So
and I would be happy to live next door to this guy.
We'd have great talks.
He gets to the right conclusions. I think I disagree somewhat with how he gets there. And I said the same thing about Passio. Like, I'm sure we'd be good neighbors because he has right conclusions, though I think there would be a lot of pentagrams that might scare some of my visitors. But, you know, that's fine. It's his property. Yeah, I'm just kidding. All right. Michael Ellis says, would love to see you do a reading like this with Stefan Molyneux's UPB, as there are some arguments he uses that would be interesting to dissect. And then I think it was probably the same guy over on Odysee says, this sounds a bit like Molyneux's UPB, which, by the way, would be a good book to read on a live stream to analyze, as there are aspects of his argument that I do not find very persuasive. I agree. There are aspects of his argument that are not persuasive.
Yes.
But it is...
Very much so.
But it is, you know, if you excuse its errors, it gets to a very contractarian place as well, for sure. Agreed. And yeah, all right, moving on. Jan Narveson is an actual philosopher. Yes, his prose could be clearer. I was hoping that it would be easier to native English speakers than it is to me, but I assure you he makes sense. Oh, it is JD. Good to see you. He loves that I'm reading Narveson.
Yeah, I also want to make clear, it's not like his work is intelligible, but as far as like clearly communicating the ideas he's trying to put across, he doesn't necessarily do that the best, is all that I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, he does the philosopher nerd thing of being extremely verbose, and I do it too, but I'm constantly fighting against it. Okay. Is this you, or are you continuing?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Better for everyone. Everyone has some idea of what's good or bad in the way of day-to-day life. I can't even read, so that's not helping anything. Sorry, guys. So, some idea of what's better and what's worse. If then we ask, what we would ideally like from our surrounding society, there's an obvious answer. Each person, A, hopes that the actions of others that affect A will make for A's own good, meaning what the person fundamentally values, rather than the reverse. Of course, that conclusion means that others hope the same from A, and doing so, an obvious thought about a personal or proposed morality is this: does it conduce to everyone's good? If so, then everyone would have a reason to go along with it.
There is no everyone's good.
Yeah, it's like a Venn diagram of goods more than anything. I think we could have like a lot of overlapping values, but there's always going to be things on the periphery. And I don't even think that's a hard claim to make. Utilitarianism is the theory that our actions, or at least our set of concrete moral rules, should, as a whole, conduce to the maximum good of society, where that is understood as the sum of goods and bads over the whole community. That definition of utilitarianism identifies a feature that makes the theory vulnerable, for it appears the theory could sanction the imposition of severe evils on some people in order to promote the good of some other people, so long as the number of latter times the degree of good in question outweighs the weighted sum of the evils of the former. So strong is this criticism that utilitarians are sure to devote a good deal of theorizing to show that the problem can somehow be avoided. And that is very true.
It is very true. And it's usually in the form of, in theory, it would turn out pretty bad for some people, but in practice, it wouldn't. Trust us.
Well, I mean, that's how the distinction between act and rule utilitarianism became a thing. Like, because act utilitarianism obviously has so many pitfalls that they came up with an entire new subset that has the same goal, just achieved through rules instead of by actions. So the total number of rules must produce the total maximum amount of good. Yeah. Sorry.
Outlaw Barber, I think you just sent me a link in YouTube chat. YouTube blocks those. If you could send it to me through any other means, I'd appreciate it. Go ahead.
The social contract view, by contrast, does not have that particular problem because all have a veto. The basic rules do not sanction the evils of some as a price to be paid for the good of others. Either those sacrificed willingly go along, in which case they see the good of the others as part of their own good, or else they don't go along and the action is overruled.
And this is the reason why I wish he wouldn't use the word social contract, because that is precisely dichotomous with how every single other person in general life uses the term social contract. Social contract is used as a specific means of forcing a person to go along with what they perceive to be the good of the collective. So what he is defining is the opposite of how social contract is used everywhere else. That is why I will never use the term for what I proffer.
Social contract, then, calls for rules such that they are expectedly better for everyone. But that approach is misleading too. Very few of any human actions is literally affect everyone, or could. And all human actions, insofar as they are deliberate and intentional, work expectedly for the good of the agent at least. No one could rationally insist on universal benefit from everyone, but we can insist on universal non-harm from everyone. Usually, harm to others is easy to avoid, whereas benefit for others is not so easy to achieve, nor do we have much motive to produce such benefit. Rather, we seek our good and therefore would promote it in cooperation with others who seek theirs. And so we find ways in which to advance our benefit mutually, acts on each person's part that benefit some in some way and others in different ways, both being agreed upon by the other. In that way, we reconcile the diversity of human nature with the need for moral restraint, and this, we hold, is the way to go for society in general. If we insist only on refraining from intervening negatively in the lives of others, the way is open in multifarious directions for benefit to many. I've never seen that word before. That's funny.
I'm looking it up. Continue.
in multifarious directions for benefit to many. And because everyone is subject to both the same rule and the same general motivation,
It
we
just
can
means a
expect-
variety. It just means variety. In various directions is what he could have said. He could have said in various directions. No. Multifarious. Excuse me. This is why people hate philosophy.
This is all in fun. This is all in fun, by the way. We can expect that. I'll just restart the sentence. And because everyone is subject to both
a multifarious fun
direction, multifarious fun. There we go.
Multifarious.
And because everyone is subject to both the same rule and the same general motivation, we can expect that the ideal of universal benefit is actually achievable, not a utopian dream, but an everyday expectation. Interesting. That is, it is so long as people are not malign. But some of them are. Against those, the theory insists on our universal right of defense of and by oneself in the first instance, and in concert with our fellows who are under threats or are ready to help out in the second instance. What those who agree to nothing else agree to is disagreement, ruling nothing out. If there are dangers to others, then those others will perforce do their best to be at least similarly dangerous to them.
JD, English is not your first language, but reading this is not any easier for us, I don't think. Go ahead. What was it? Multifarious? No. What was it? Malignant?
No, perforce.
Perforce. Looking that one up now.
Yeah.
I feel like an idiot. I'm not an idiot, but
I'm pretty sure it means try, basically.
By necessity, by force of circumstance. Perforce. Of necessity. Then those others will of necessity do their best to be at least similarly dangerous to them. Can you summarize this paragraph for the people listening? Definitely not me. Just for the people listening that might not understand. I totally get it.
So basically, you can't shoot people unless they do something bad to you. Then you can shoot them. And if we don't agree on anything, we can, as long as they don't hurt us, we still can't do anything to them. And if they're dangerous to others, then those others will, So basically you're saying that you have a right to self-defense. Anybody who acts like a state of nature being can expect to be acted upon them as a state of nature being as well.
Yeah,
I read it asked for it.
Yeah, I read it again. I don't disagree with what he says, but wow. Let's continue.
Okay. They have, as we say, asked for it. The only things we can rule out for society as a whole are things we each want to avoid on our own behalf. The reason the object of the social contract is not in the first instance government becomes, as we reflect on it, clear in two ways. The first place, there are any number of governments and nations to be governed. If there were a single supercontinent, would its object be an ideal world government?
I'm sorry. I guess read slower or something. This is like fucking Greek. The reason the object of the social contract is not in the first instance government becomes clear in two ways. The reason the object of the social contract is not in the first instance government becomes clear in two ways. Okay. Just rewording it a little bit to make it hopefully make more sense. In the first place, there are any number of governments and nations to be governed. If there were a single super contract, would its object be an ideal world government, or would it underwrite every government there is, warts and all? Okay, sorry, please continue. I just had to...
I said supercontinent anyways. I was obviously getting jumbled, so...
Yeah, I just had to slow down and, rearrange that. Okay.
The second has to do with contract. Morality is about peace, but government is about war, coercion, violence, social control.
Yes.
Agents of the state are of two types: Machiavellians, or far more frequently, dissemblers who claim that they are using all of this coercion for excellent reasons, even as they line their pockets at our expense. The agreements government want are not social contracts, but alliances with some other governments against still others, and agreements among potential friends who will assist in supporting this particular government's program of extraction.
Yep. Very, yes. Maybe not well said, but agreed. Yeah.
All right. Liberalism to libertarianism. Liberalism is a much discussed and much contested notion. Much of the discussion, however, is due to lack of definition, even an insistence that clear definition is impossible. But a reasonably clear, fairly definite understanding of the idea enables us to make sense of it and to see what's right about it. It goes as follows. Liberalism is exemplified by normative systems that hold 2 points. A, that the sole acceptable purpose of rules, laws, and in general interventions must be the good of those intervened upon. And
What?
B,
I don't know if that's true.
Those I just want to get through this so I can unpack it. And B, that it is those persons themselves rather than any supposed authorities who fundamentally embrace those values. Okay. The sole acceptable purpose of rules, laws, and in general interventions must be the good of those intervened upon.
As judged by the ones being intervened upon.
I think he's
that's
talking
an
about
asterisk, right? That needs to be added.
I think he's talking about like contemporary liberalism in like a political sense, because this doesn't seem to fit liberalism as a broader notion that I understand, but
Agreed.
He is defining it here. So,
Yep.
And it is those persons themselves rather than any supposed who fundamentally embrace those values. Yeah. Okay. So well, I'm going to operate off of the assumption that he's talking about the political liberalism in reference to, because he is also going to talk about libertarianism. So
Yep.
that would kind of make sense. Individuals then are the basic holders of the values that interventionist institutions and personages are to respect. We might say that they are originators of value, but that statement is misleading and gets us into unnecessary meta-ethical discussions that we kind of already had.
Oh, the unnecessary ones. Okay.
Both are essential. So-called liberals of the present day, exactly, tend to think that they, the pundits or the theorists or the elected politicians, know what the people want better than those people themselves.
Or what's best for them. Yeah.
Yeah. On the first point, liberals contrast with Jesus Christ.
Get it right on the first time. You have to get it right on the first try. So say it in your head first.
Thrasymachus?
I think that's pretty good. I'll look it up.
Thrasymachus?
Well, we have a Greek guy in chat. He probably making fun of us right now.
Thrasymachus. That has to be it.
How to pronounce
Thrasymachus. Sorry, guys.
This is important.
This is a character in Plato's Republic.
Is brought to you by pronouncenames.com.
Yeah, everybody shout out pronouncenames.com.
Thrasymachus.
Oh, I was close. Thrasymachus.
It's
Thrasymachus.
A Z sound.
Thrasymachus.
Thrasymachus.
Thrasymachus. Okay. On the first point, liberals contrast with Thrasymachus in Plato's Republic, who declares for kleptocracy. The purpose of government, he says, is to extract the maximum from the governed. Government is for the sake of the governors rather than the governed. The second contrasts with Plato himself and with all whom we may refer to as conservatives, a term whose popular usage is related to but not identical to this, who would insist that someone else knows what's good for us better than we do. Our good is not what we say, but what he or it, where it refers to some supposedly authoritative institution or group, says. The liberty and dignity of the individual follow from those two basic features, and they, in turn, lead to the social contract theory. For if we each fundamentally pursue our own values, and yet we wish for the protection of restrictions against the interventions of others, then we shall have to secure them on the basis of mutually agreeable arrangements, those that leave each of us better off and no others worse off. And by far, the main respect in which we can expect this improvement is to forego the method of promoting our benefit that consists in forcibly extracting it from others. Not then impose slavery, but free exchange. That is libertarianism.
Libertarianism. To understand how the libertarian principle can be applied. Oh, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Oh no, I was bopping.
That was
the music
good, right?
stopped.
To understand how, do you know I get copyright claimed for that clip? Like they catch those little 4-second clips. Anyway, libertarianism.
Wow.
To understand how that's why I don't care. I'm just going to Odysee now. I don't care about YouTube. To understand how the libertarian principle can be applied to social contract theory, we first need to clarify and define the basics of libertarianism. Libertarianism. What and why? The essence of libertarianism is that we declare peace. Each person has a right to the non-aggression of others. So there is a general duty.
We've been reading for a while. It's good. I've fucked up so many words.
What are you, retarded? So he, no, you're not retarded. But what are you, Down syndrome?
So there is a general duty of non-aggression. It is tiresome but necessary to remind readers that justified defensive actions are not aggressive. They are rational responses to others' aggressions. Note that this security is not based on self-ownership, as is often said, for it is self-ownership. To own oneself is to have the right to decide what one is going to do, which is the same as others being required to refrain from the aggressive interventions of others. Forced vaccinations. But it is literally based on our capacity to promote our own good, plus the perceived capacity of others to interfere with that promotion, and of our own to interfere with theirs. Thus, we all benefit from mutual peace. Pareto. The social contract presumes a general sort of equality, but it is not equality in the capacity to produce goods. It is rather a rough equality of broadly aggressive capabilities of our capacities to make life worse for others. It is that capacity that is, socially speaking, our chief problem. And it is that leads us to adopt the Pareto criterion of exchange. An exchange is said to be Pareto superior if at least one party is better off and all others no worse. Of course, in a one-on-one exchange, each party acts to promote his own benefit, and so each is, or at least supposes himself to be better off as a result. Meanwhile, there is everyone else who possibly may be affected by our interaction, and social contract calls on us to respect all those other people's interests as well, namely by not worsening them through our actions. And so social contract sanctions all and only transactions that leave at least some better off and none worse off than in the status quo before the exchange. The only thing I wish he had said in that paragraph is, like, in those people's judgments. But even then, it's still messy because, like, if I'm competing in a marketplace against other people and I make a transaction with somebody that gives me an edge over my competition is left less well off, and I don't care. So
that is
go ahead.
That is exactly the example I was thinking of whenever I was reading this, which made me wish he said, instead of worse off or better off or anything like that, he would use like I know this is all nested inside of like the one big essay, so we're supposed to be able to assume what he's saying based off of what he's established before. But just for clarity of language, I wish instead of worse off, he would say like aggressed against, or just be really clear on what that means, because worse and better, they're very subjective words. Like they sound subjective.
Yeah,
carry
Matt
that
in chat
connotation.
said better or worse is not objective and is multifariously subjective.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
I don't agree. I don't disagree with the sentiment. I just wish it was, because I have to kind of assume that he agrees with me instead of knowing that he agrees with me is the issue.
I'm pretty sure we agree. I think it's just, it was messily worded. Our broadly Hobbesian perspective is that the fundamental beneficial exchange with all others is peace for peace. I don't harm you, you don't harm me, which is better for all than the war of all against all, in which we cannot expect or rely on the forbearance of others. It is also better than the war of some against some, if peace is possible. Nothing about those exchanges, however, requires that the degree of benefit we might each obtain from a given exchange be equal, if we can even measure the quantities whose equality is in question. It has been a stumbling block of utilitarianism since its inception that there is no obvious way to come up with an interpersonally valid such measure, but that we each subjectively, estimating our situations, reckon that we will improve our lives from the transaction is by comparison not generally difficult. Indeed, the sheer fact that each party voluntarily accepts it is taken to be presumptively sufficient reason to suppose this. That is all to say value is subjective, and it's up to the people involved in a transaction to determine if they are left better off. Importantly, we can come up with evident, socially transmissible ways of indicating our assent to proposed arrangements. All we need on that score is effective communication. We come up with the language of promises and contracts to do the job, and it generally works. Where it breaks down, we will need means of negotiation and adjudication to settle possible disputes. Let me, interrupt me if you have comments. I'm going to trudge on otherwise.
No, just keep going. Yeah.
Rights, right, and the general right of liberty. To say that someone, A, has a right is to envisage that there is somewhere else, B, upon whom this right of A's imposes a duty, which is a cost to those upon whom it is imposed. Note that that's all that rights are, duty imposers. That's like an inverse way of saying what I say. Like all moral rules are self-restrictions. Note that that's all that rights are, duty imposers.
As long as the imposer is on yourself, then I don't have an issue with that.
True. But I disagree with that. I mean, rights are reciprocal agreements. So it requires both people to do it for rights to exist, qua rights as a concept. Like both people have to reciprocate. So I think rights, without talking about reciprocation with other people, I think rights is ill-defined here. A supposed right that imposes no restrictions on anyone, such as Hobbes' so-called right of nature, is simply not a right at all. Rights, like morality in general, are about our interrelations. Here we go. Okay, so maybe we're going to complete the definition now. People relating to each other. If some theorist purports to be asserting rights of animals, canyons, and so on, what he is attempting to do is to impose duties on us. Okay. This is how most people talk about rights. It's not how I prefer to talk about it. I think this is messy, but most people would understand, so I'm being pedantic again. Canyons and seals cannot speak for themselves, and from the viewpoints of those of us who don't see any benefit in accepting the proposed rights of canyons or seals, the advocate has an uphill battle. And since the social contract is strictly notional, meaning I think he means conceptual, it is not a political convention, and everyone has a veto. It's a lost battle at the level of fundamental rights, which is what we seek here. If animals are to have rights, that will have to be well downstream. Where it is proclaimed that someone has a fundamental moral right, B is everyone else. Moral rights are rights of everyone against everyone. Libertarianism's proposed fundamental right is that of peace from all others. That is, their refraining from aggressions. Refraining from aggressions is a cost to them insofar as they suppose they might benefit from such aggressions. To get a unanimous agreement of all with all, at least notionally, We therefore need to show that everyone does better on balance by accepting this cost in return for the benefits of security from the depredations of his fellows. What would make it worthwhile to accept this cost must be that peace is seen by the others as better than war. If they don't get it, then we will, of course, have war. That is the bottom line, and the respect in which Hobbes has the right idea. Social life with no constraints is dangerous and likely altogether unprofitable. With them we can advance together. Without them we have the unhappy Hobbesian prediction, life devoid of the benefits of civilization and, quote, nasty, brutish, and short. And so we may as well admit that the general fundamental right of liberty is had by all and only all those for whom peace is preferable to war. We can argue that this liberty is for literally everybody, but against those advancing with guns, argument will have to wait. Still, it is arguable that a consequence of this statement is that immorality is a live option. Immorality as a live option is going to be less profitable as military technology and social organization advance. One hopes that the war of all against all will become, as time goes on, the war of some few against all the rest of us. And frankly, that we who prefer longevity, comfort, and interesting lives will win. In going for the simplest principle, Hobbes' first law of nature, calling for peace and the renunciation and proscription of wars of aggression, we adopt the rationally most plausible basic morality. Do you have anything to say? Go for it.
I'm kind of echoing what you said earlier, but I really just wish that, I don't agree with his conception of rights as this like individual monolithic thing that exists in and of itself, even by rational deduction. Like it requires a party reciprocating. There is nowhere rights exist without another person to reciprocate them. And I think he touches on this sentiment. He just doesn't state it as clearly as I would like. So maybe it's kind of a non-issue. I don't know.
Well, if we're defining rights properly, a right can be positive because it's reciprocated. So like you and I, Christian, could reciprocate a right between us where every morning we wake up and make coffee for each other. And I bring you coffee and you bring me coffee. And we reciprocate the right of coffee. Christian, you have a right to coffee every morning. And Patrick has a right to coffee provided by Christian every morning. And we could reciprocate that. And it would be as much of a right as the other right that says Patrick may not punch Christian and Christian may not punch Patrick. And we reciprocate that right. I think that's the clearest, simplest way to understand rights.
Yeah.
All right, let's see.
And he specifically speaks at them from the negative angle, which I think, just obfuscates it that much more. Sorry.
Yep.
I'll let you go.
Liberty and property. Libertarian and classical liberal thinkers have been distinctive in proclaiming a right of property as part and parcel of the basic array of moral rights to which we should all be entitled. For example, in Locke's version, the law of nature calls upon all, quote, not to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or property, end quote. A careful analysis will show that his law is equivalent to Hobbes' first law as well, but we needn't pursue that here. What we do need to pursue, however, is his fourth entry, which raises many eyebrows. The basic right of peace is easily seen to forbid attacks on our persons, yes, but why on our properties as well? Of course, Locke rightly points out that our properties include, indeed start with, ourselves, a claim that, as pointed out earlier, is really equivalent to the liberty principle itself. But external property? Houses, cars, TV sets, coal mines, 747s, how do those items make it into the protected set? The beginning of wisdom here is to appreciate that an attack on your property is an attack on you. If you try to defend against my attack, then I have to attack not your TV set, but your person. The question then becomes, why should you give in to my attacks rather than defend? For that is what a denial of my property rights amounts to. The answer is in the main also supplied by Locke, but as this is not a history of the subject, but a theoretical exposition, we won't pursue exegesis here. Exegesis? God damn it. Imagine making audiobooks. This is how it goes.
Exegesis.
Exegesis. We won't pursue exegesis here. Instead, we follow the customary division of how we acquire things. A can avail himself of X for his own use by A, simply finding it, being there, occupying it, as when it's a bit of land, or B, by making X, in which case it would be requisite that the stuff he makes it out of is also somehow his, rather than someone else's, or C, someone else, B, could just give X to A out of love, say. And then D, A could get X by exchange. A previously has Y, B has X, each would prefer that the other now has to what he or she has, and so they make an agreed exchange. Could have just said trade. Okay. This exchange transfers the property from one to the other in a completely peaceable way. And finally, of course, E. A might just take it from B, but this fifth way we hold is excluded by our principle. The question is how? And the short answer is that what is here called theft, or more accurately, dispossession against the will of the previous possessor, is a case of aggression, because aggression is intervention against his will into the life and activities of another person in a way that leaves him worse off. The liberal idea entitles us to take it that leaving B worse off and against B's will for such cases are equivalent, noting that B is always free to change his mind about what is to his benefit. Aggression is making war, just what the Hobbesian libertarian principle forbids. If X is previously within B's possession, and it came to be so without any previous aggression by B against anyone else, then forcibly separating X from B is wrongful, a violation of B's right. Most humans are sympathetic. If the person who attacks us is, say, in desperate need, most of us are ready to help. But we aren't ready to simply turn over our valued and legitimately obtained things, e.g., our incomes, to all comers. And the libertarian principle says that we may not be forced to do so at all. In this, the libertarian differs radically from every other political and moral orientation. A brief note.
I have a question before you continue. Oh, yeah, go ahead first. So under his definition of theft, would it not be theft if I stole my brother's heroin and his life changed around and he was way better because I did it? Because aggression is intervention against his will into the life and activities of another person in a way that leaves him worse off. Are we just talking like materially worse off? Like he no longer has the heroin?
The objection I brought up earlier, where he doesn't say the thing, the asterisk that needs to be said here is in whose judgment is he harmed or worse or better off. It's the unspoken missing premise of a lot of these arguments. It has to be against the person whose property is acted on's judgment that harm is. Like harm is subjective. Harm is subjective. It has to be up to the person being acted on. So I don't know. I don't think we disagree. I suspect that Narveson would agree on that. It's just it's unspoken in this document. So, okay. A brief note about socialism. A comparison with what we may very broadly term socialist theories is useful here. They are garbage. I am right. Oh, sorry. The libertarian principle differs from any socialist idea in the following way. Socialisms in general proclaim egalitarianism in the sense that nobody is able to advance more than anyone else. The condition of progress for A is that A shares it with B, C, and so on, in a supposedly equal degree. Of course, thereby inheriting the classic problems of measurement of utilities that has plagued utilitarianism from the start. And so, in its political economic version, socialists call for appropriation by agents of the public for redistribution along the particular egalitarian line being pressed by the version in question. For example, quote, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. By contrast, libertarianism permits any action of A's that advances A's well-being so long merely as it does not thereby worsen B's. There's that worsen word that you objected to earlier that I still think bears objecting to. Particular actions or specific programs of action need not literally improve the situations of all or even anyone other than the individual actor, or whoever that actor is trying to benefit. So, Consider the hypothetical desperate person described earlier. Do we harm him by refusing to help? No. We do not make that person worse off than in the status quo in which the individual is already desperate. After our refusal, the person is still desperate. But, of course, we, meanwhile, might have offered a paying job or temporary aid until the person gets on his or her feet. We might have even persuaded a great many people to join in an insurance network to alleviate just such cases. I think an analogy that is unaddressed here, and we'll just use the desperate person described earlier as an example. If there's one guy with one slice of bread and he's selling it, and I buy that slice of bread from that person selling it at a higher price such that I win the buy and the desperate person loses the buy, that trade, that peaceable consensual interaction between me and the seller leaves the desperate person, well, I guess he wouldn't be worse off, would he? He would be the same off as he was. But still, that would worsen B's. Well, would it worsen? No, I guess it wouldn't worsen B's. Maybe I'm wrong here. Hold on, let me think. It wouldn't worsen the desperate person's situation because he was already desperate. Okay, so this is not
unless we're trying to say that like the potential for better, if getting in the way of that is bad, but I don't think that's the case. So
Michael Ellis is going to write Libertarianism for Dummies, and he will use no words like exegesis.
I appreciate that.
Same.
If it was just the one time, that'd be one thing, but it's not. So
yeah, there's been a multifarious amount of words. But the fundamental social... I'm using that all the time now. No one's going to have any idea what I'm talking about. But the fundamental social contract does, in another way, meet the egalitarian criterion as stated, and, libertarians hold, meets it better than any socialism. We are all better off having libertarian morality in place, even if we are not necessarily all better off from anyone's doing any particular right action. The reason is that in our hypothetical prior condition of total amorality, people are not forbidden to harm others in any number of ways, including killing. Clearly, to live in a society where nobody kills is a big improvement. If everyone's having an internalized inhibition against such killing serves, in fact, to prevent those killings, then having a morality, which is essentially a set of internalized inhibitions, that was my definition of morality. He's using a different definition of morality in here than he was earlier, which is essentially a set of internalized inhibitions, will lead to the safer condition in question. And that is a major improvement. Moreover, says the Libertarian, contrary to what you might think, we are all better off living under the Libertarian principle than under any seemingly more generous principle. A society where we are compelled to do much for others, even when it leads to no benefit to ourselves or those we care for, is more onerous than one in which we are all free to not wear masks, to help as much as we care to, but also not to help if we don't care to. Not, it should be noted, free from the frowns of others, but free from at least... Not, it should be noted, free from Karens, but free at least from their swords and chains. Do you like my transposition of this article?
Yeah, that's good.
Whereas, as history so resoundingly attests, societies imposing huge burdens on all remain or become poor. So poor that their typical citizens are worse off than the beggars in free societies. The impositions of welfarist moralities ring hollow, just like the promises of politicians with which we are all familiar. Luck, egalitarian libertarianism. Some theorists have argued that because we cannot possibly have made the set of natural resources upon which we ultimately draw to make into usable goods to enhance our conditions, then somehow... Then we should take the view that those basic resources are somehow public property. Locke himself begins that way, immediately recognizing that so to regard it poses a major problem for any ideas of legitimate acquisition by individuals. The, quote, luck egalitarian libertarian's idea is that we should distribute the value of undeveloped natural resources equally among all in the interests of fairness. But above that, it's free market all the way. What we cannot do is agree with, for example, the Sharia, whose, quote, whole package, according to an Islamic spokesman, would include free housing, food, and clothing for all, though, of course, anyone who wished to enrich himself with work could do so, end quote. After all, the luck egalitarian reasons, none of us can have done anything to deserve whatever assets we may have or that our environment offer by nature. Before we are born, there is no we to have done any deserving, and after, it is too late. Here we are, having emerged from this particular womb in this particular natural and social environment, none of which could have been our doing. So how can we deserve it? Now, one may be tempted to go from, quote, no one deserves it any more than anyone else, which is surely true, to, so it should go equally to all, which is clearly not. But the reasoning is fallacious. If the idea is that it is a necessary condition of one's legitimately having X that one deserves X, and it is then observed that at the outset no one deserves anything, then what should be equally distributed is not everything, it's nothing. And that way lies madness. And after that, it is but a quick step to realize that we should be regarded as entitled, to use Robert Nozick's nice distinction, to whatever just is part of us or attached to us or in whatever way given to us by nature or by our own efforts, somehow carved out of or extracted from nature. For to deprive us of what we possess, however we came to possess it, so long as it was not by violence, is to aggress against us. And that deprivation, to remind yet again, is precisely what is forbidden by the basic law. Note. When a philosopher says note, it's going to be important, right? Note. One could have been given by nature some horrible physical malady, say. Some of nature's endowments we could be glad to be without. Forbidding others from taking those, if they could, would be otiose. Otiose?
I'm fucking hitting the Google machine, man. What the fuck? Lazy or indolent?
Forbidding others from taking those, if they could, would be lazy or indolent. Well, I'm glad he added that note. Have-nots!
Yeah.
Free markets on poverty. Especially here in the wealthy West, many wring their hands over the plight, as it may be, of their countries or the world's poor. And they ask how those poor are to be ministered to in the absence of state assistance. There are two excellent responses to this, plus a very fundamental third. So he took time to let us know that there are two excellent ones and one fundamental one. Okay.
Oh.
So, first excellent one. Well, I mean, he didn't tell us which ones are excellent and which ones are fundamental, so I feel he left that out.
We'll have to figure it out.
What do we do?
Yeah,
what do we do?
We'll have to deduce it.
Okay. Deduction engine engaged. Number one, it is not obvious that the better off owe anything to the poor. If anything, it is pretty obvious that they don't. For it is not the activities of the relatively wealthier that have made the poor poor. Bad government, bad luck, and various sheer circumstantial factors account for nearly all cases. Well, that doesn't work when you have the rich in bed with government. What were you going to say?
I feel like that's the fundamental one, if I was just going to guess immediately. But
well, he did say plus a fundamental third, so maybe it's the third one.
Maybe.
Okay. Number two. By this time, most of the world's poor are poor because of the incursions of governments, usually military, either their own or neighboring ones. Obviously, the first thing to do is to get those armed men off their backs, however that's to be done. It involves blip blap. Number three. State largesse is always extracted from taxpayers, many of whom will always be unwilling. A non-coercive solution is always to be preferred, and such a solution is essentially universally available. The poor are ready to work for lower wages, making profitable interaction with them a live option. Whenever the world politics permits such beneficent exploitation, we can expect it to happen. Exploitation was in quotes. And that will certainly solve the problem, just as it has in the wealthy countries already. As, for example, in modern China, which has, after abandoning the absurdities of Maoism, and that it's now returning to, effectively embraced market solutions, raising the living standards of 500 million or more from dire poverty to Asian standard middle class in a very few decades. Something that socialism showed no potential whatever for accomplishing. We add that poverty in the, quote, rich nations is trivial compared with that in Africa and South Asia, yet those unfortunate nations are also coming along despite their desperately awful governments. These fortunate areas, whose governments have reasonably free market sympathies, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, are far above the levels endured by the citizens of, say, North Korea. They indeed have joined the world's rich economies. This is the ultimate solution to poverty. Hand-wringing and sponging off taxpayers are not. We, of course, should and do regard it as a virtue to be helpful to others, including the poorly off, who are naturally likely to be prime candidates for philanthropic assistance. But such assistance is necessarily temporary and occasional, especially useful in response to disasters such as tsunamis and earthquakes. Otherwise, however, the market is our fundamental and sufficient recourse. The poor we need not always have with us unless you insist on counting as poor those in the lower tenths or fifths or whatever. This whole section could have been cut from this article and we would have been fine. This whole thing. But to do that, however, politically unpopular, trivializes the problem insofar as it is one. All right, why don't you take the conclusion? This is it.
Oh boy, I get to wrap it all up. Thanks for doing that meaty section there.
Yeah, bring it home.
Conclusion. Social contract is misconstrued as an agreement among a particular set of people to establish a government. Properly viewed as an account of the underlying rationale and genesis of morality, it is the fundamental rational approach to that subject and, in consequence, to that of government. It is so because it accounts for, derives morals from the very general facts of human nature and society in terms comprehensible to all normal people. I think we're working on the comprehensible part. We're getting there.
Yeah.
It proceeds from the obvious premise that we are all possessed of interests and abilities, that we live among others of broadly similar situations in those respects, and that we can communicate and achieve cooperative solutions to serious problems of supply. No other moral theory does so without resorting to mysteries and opacities. And the most natural and obvious reading of our situations impels us to the libertarian view as our fundamental moral outlook. It is that basis that enables us to make progress in social life. No more can reasonably be asked. Woo! We got through it. We did it.
Good job, everybody watching. I hope you enjoyed it.
You all made it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where to start? I think that's the next question, right? So I think a good place to start actually is
what did it get right? Let's start there. What did it get right?
99% of the things in this I agree with. I agree with the idea that the logical or the rational outcome, as we'll say it, of any philosophy is going to be essentially a principle of non-aggression. If one's goal is to elevate above the state of nature. If it isn't, then you can do anything you want. But if one's goal is to elevate above the state of nature, which we spent a good amount of time talking about the state of nature and why he believes that we should live above it, which is always important because this is a subjective preference that a person has to make, then a system of non-aggression, I agree, is the circumstances by which that would be derived, specifically with the least number of arbitrary claims. And so I think all that's good. A lot of his justifications for free market and for property, I think those are all good. And so there are many, many, many commonalities between Narveson and myself from a philosophical perspective. So that's all the things I think we agree on. I think I basically said I agree with all of it pretty much, except for a couple things.
Yeah, I agree with most of the foundational stuff that he took from Hobbes, except for the government. So I think that's a good foundation of what he got right. Yeah, I agree with what you said, so I'm not going to say it again.
Okay.
Yeah, he got that right. What Christian just said. What he got wrong is harder to discern. It's really it depends on if you read this charitably or not. If you read this antagonistically, I could give you a list of things he got wrong and things that he did not justify with arguments or reason. But that I probably bet if I get him on the show, he would have more discussion. He would fill in the blanks. He would answer my assumptions that I would antagonistically project onto this article. If I read it charitably, then there's a lot less problems. Though there still is a few, namely around what constitutes messing with other people's stuff. What was the word he used? It wasn't. I mean, harm was
worsen.
Worsening other people's stuff. I think it's a terrible word to use in this situation. I think he definitely got that wrong. I think I already raised most of what I think he got wrong other than those. So what do you think he got wrong?
Yeah, I think the conclusion kind of touches a little bit on some of my concerns, like that this contractarianism is like the genesis of morality. I think that the social contract is what comes out of the social contract he advocates for is what comes out of good morality, the agreements between people, because I feel like it's almost skipping a step to say the social contract is the genesis, the contractarianism is the genesis of morality, because you first as a person have to make the decision that you want to live above the state of nature. That is the genesis of morality. And then acting upon that is the continuation of morality, right? If you were to act in an adverse way towards that, it wouldn't matter. You'd still be in the state of nature. There is no morality in the state of nature. So if we are to say that the social contract is the genesis, that would kind of like presuppose the desire to live above the state of nature to begin with, which I think is fine for communicating the idea, but as far as like philosophical rigidity, I think is a bit putting the cart before the horse. What do you think about that?
I think if I get him on the show, I think we'll talk through and say what you just said, and he'll agree. That's what I think. I think if we're being charitable, reading his positions, I bet he would agree. And I think I feel like that particular article left a lot undefined that needs defining to really know if I agree or disagree with him, to be honest. So that's where I'm at. That's my conclusion. My conclusion is I don't know if I agree with him. I need to talk to him more. So maybe we need to contact him. If anybody has contact information for Jan Narveson, hit me up. Send it to me. I will get my producer to schedule a show with him, and we'll get him on. And Christian, you will be invited if I do get him on.
Well, thanks. And I do think like we agree on so much that this really comes down to like if you're how do I say this without sounding? I'm not trying to sound pretentious, but if you're just a normal libertarian person who just wants to live good principles, the distinctions I'm making don't really matter. If you're the kind of person like me who really wants to like get into the weeds of why things are the way they are or how they should be seen or what's the correct quote unquote way to view them, then these things matter. So, for a normal person living a normal life, if you did everything talked about in this contractarianism article, we would have no issues whatsoever at all. We might just have a couple interesting discussions,
Matt, I don't know what you're talking about. He says, so he doesn't touch on overt corporate control over society and how it pretty much merges with the state when it becomes big enough. Insider buddies are the capitalists at first.
Oh no. Is this the Twitter discourse lately bleeding over into the chat?
If it is, bring it on. I will destroy you. Oh, sorry. All right. So
capitalism's great until
it uses its property in ways that I don't like.
I'm sorry to the chat if that's not the case.
It's probably not. It's probably not.
Yeah, it's probably not. I'm bringing baggage into this conversation, so don't take that personally if it's not you.
Okay, so now that we've done kind of a micro deep dive into contractarianism, I would like to end the show by contrasting it with contractualism, which we recently discovered is different, even though it uses the same freaking word, because, you know, philosophers do that on purpose. So there's a group of philosophers, one in particular, Rawls, who is a Christian, tells me, who is all the rage in colleges these days. And
he's the most influential philosopher of the 20th century, and I did not call him that. That's a title he has apparently earned in academic spaces, which blows my mind. But go ahead.
Imagine socialist professors think he's the most influential because he espouses socialism. But
Weird.
it's under the vein of contractualism. So could you give us like a compare and contrast between contractarianism, which is what we just read, and contractualism, which is more in the vein of Rawls and an apologist for effectively socialism?
So I'm going to be mildly reductive because we just did an entire thing on contractarianism. I hope it's still fresh in everybody's brains. But the easiest way to think about this, and actually I'll just make it even simpler than that. Contractarianism is to utilitarianism as contractualism is to moral equality. And that sounds super obtuse, but I think that's the easiest way to put it down. And what I mean is that contractarianism is fundamentally ends-based. Fundamentally, it says, oh, we all want the best outcome. This is the best outcome. This is the way that we achieve it. And the best outcome is all of these things, right? And contractualism is grounded in the equal moral status of other people. So like there is no other option. Kant is very often referenced as like the inspiration for contractualism, because in Kant's world, there is no other option than to treat another person as an equal rational agent. When contractarianism accepts the fact that there are alternative options, except for you shouldn't do those things because it'll lead to worse outcomes for all of us.
Yeah, that's really what I was looking for, was just to contrast this with Rawls, because I have not read Rawls. You have, so I was just looking for your, I was just looking for, you know, that contrast between contractarianism and Rawls. Rawlsianism.
One example is like in the contractarianism piece we just read, he very clearly states that not all of it, and I think that entire section where he's like, we're not all equal, we're not all do equal things, is specifically calling at Rawls. Because Rawls has this theory, which is in his theory of justice, called the original position, which is basically, for anybody who isn't aware, we're all genderless, amorphous blobs of all equal moral status, and we're all up in space, and we get to decide how the entire world is going to be. What kind of choices would we make if we just ran the lottery after that and we wound up being a rich person in the US, or if we were going to be some rice farmer in Indonesia or something? You know, so the idea from that is that, well, we're all equal, so we should make the society that's the most equal for all of us. And that to me is the fundamental distinction between the two things. Kant definitely differs from this a lot, which is why he's called the inspiration and not a contractualist himself, because he has a lot of his eccentricities that he tries to work around these problems with that keeps him from being a full-blown contractualist. But that I would say is the fundamental distinction, because they both believe in a social contract. It's just why the social contract exists is very different between the two.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Anything else? Any final thoughts on those? Oh, we have some more questions from Matt. Actually, it's not a question. It's a statement. Libertarian point of view often ignores the fact that pure capitalism leads to some terrible outcomes. You have to do harm to continue in a purely free market at one point or another.
What are you, retarded? So retarded. But what are you, Down syndrome?
Okay. So libertarian point of view often ignores the fact that pure capitalism leads to some terrible outcomes. So leaving people alone and respecting their property leads to some terrible outcomes. You have to do harm to continue in a market devoid of doing harm. So this is a self-contradictory statement. You have to do harm to continue to not attack people and take their stuff, to have free and consensual trade. This doesn't make any sense.
I think this kind of goes to what we were talking to about the ambiguity of the term worsens. From whose perspective, right? Or from what temporal space? So like, are we talking you have to allow people to continue to live in squalor, or that's always an option, right? Like people may say their lives are worse off because you didn't give them everything they need and, big check and solve all their financial issues. But that's not what contractarianism is about, as far as I understand it. Or anything, or libertarianism is nobody is trying to like these amorphous future goals, like try to prevent negative outcomes for them. It's very much immediate. It's very much in the now. You have 10 paper clips, and it doesn't matter what I do, as long as you still have those 10 paper clips at the end of the day, I haven't done anything to harm you, right? And a very reductive example of what I'm trying to get across.
Diogenes in the comments answered it well. He says, once capitalism merges with the state, it's no longer capitalism because there's guns involved. It's no longer what we're talking about as capitalism. It's something entirely different. It's some weird corporate merging with the state. It's a government with a business license, which is still just government. Once force is introduced to sex, it is no longer making love. Matt? Okay, little long. All right.
Unless they consent.
Yeah, Matt says, show me a single mega corporation that hasn't fused with the state. Show you a single so if I could or whether I couldn't doesn't affect my argument in this area at all. Once a mega corporation fuses with the state, then it's no longer capitalism, and I don't care to defend it, and I'm not defending it. At a certain point, if you want to continue your corporation, in most cases, hold on. Sorry, I'm trying. Look, this debate over text is not going to go well. You're welcome on the show to talk through it with me if you'd like to. I'm totally happy to have good conversations. Callie, you can call in right now if you have Skype. I'll give you, like 30 seconds if you have Skype and you want to call in. We'll set that up. Okay, well, Christian, thanks. I've enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, it was good. It was good to actually go through and like pick it apart instead of just having it on in the background whenever, when I was listening through the whole thing when you first released it.
Yeah,
when I was proofreading it.
I'm still not going to call myself a contractarian, mainly because the term social contract is already it's dead to me. That term is so perverted and understood differently by everyone that I'm not going to have anything to do with it. It only describes what I hold to be the case if you take it using a very non-standard definition. So, Matt says, okay, then ignore me. Dude, Matt. I literally just invited you on the show to have a conversation. That is the opposite of ignoring you. Stop being butthurt and trying to play in philosophy. Philosophy is for the big boys. It involves conflict and disagreement, and that's okay. It's okay for us to disagree. I invited you on the show. That's not ignoring you. Come on. Start up Skype right now. That is the opposite of ignoring you. I'm inviting you to have the conversation right now. What was I saying?
You're not going to take up the term contractarianism because social contract.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. This paper, while I agree immensely, I also agree immensely with a lot of other people with labels that I don't describe myself as, mostly because I feel like they're not necessary. If there was something in here that really compelled me to be like, oh, this really like directly is what I'm saying or whatever, maybe I wouldn't have an issue with adding it to my list of tags or whatever. But I still think I would I would need more conversations, less fluff, more down into the dirt of the actual ethics, where we can have kind of a back and forth on it to really be able to say for certain, which, yeah, I think that's a healthy position to take.
I'm still struggling to come up with a name for specifically what I'm describing, and the closest thing that I think you and I have come up with is anti-subjectivist. Maybe even like deontological anti-subjectivist. How's that?
I think anti-subjectivist is it's an unclaimed term for a philosophy. It's more like you could argue that some people use it as a position against, but they have a term. It's called being a moral objectivist. So they already got a name. I say this one's fully claimable. Anti-subjectivism is a name ripe for proper definition. So,
yep. Matt is upset that I've stopped reading his responses, even though I'm reading that one right now. I was trying to do your side of the argument justice by inviting you on, so it's not a one-sided. Look, I can read your comments and fucking destroy them right now. I can. But that wouldn't do your side justice. I want you to come on so that you can respond, so it can be a two-way conversation and you can defend yourself. Right now it's one way. It's not fair. I'm trying to elevate the conversation. Stop being it. Never mind. Invitation retracted. Jesus. All right. Sorry, Christian. Excuse me.
No, you're fine.
Whew. Okay. I think we're done. Anybody else? Are we good?
So. Good. Anybody else? Anybody else hate freedom? No, sorry, I'm joking.
He wants me to read them and destroy them. All right, let's do that. We'll close out the show by reading and destroying his comments. And
right.
make sure to not respond, Matt, because I've given you the opportunity to come on the show and actually respond. But, keyboard pounding doesn't count. Okay. Libertarian point of view often ignores the fact that pure capitalism leads to some terrible outcomes. So if I'm defining capitalism as free trade, absence of coercion in trade between people, or the private ownership of property and the means of production, non-coercive ownership of property. If that leads to terrible outcomes, so be it. I don't think it will. I'm not arguing that. Don't see any evidence that it does. That's on you to prove. When you say that these companies conglomerating with government means that capitalism leads to bad outcomes, I'm saying that you've changed the definition of capitalism, or you're using a definition of capitalism that I'm not. So you're attacking something that I'm not defending. So knock yourself out. I'm not defending corporations that join in with the government to use the guns of government to get themselves benefits in the marketplace. I don't support that. That's not capitalism. That's not what I'm defending. So if you're saying that leads to bad outcomes, we don't disagree. It does lead to terrible outcomes all over the place. But that's also not the libertarian position that you're attacking. So you're attacking a position that isn't held by libertarians or myself. Destroyed, number one. Once capitalism, let's see, Matt, show me a single mega corporation that hasn't fused with the state. I don't need to, because if it does fuse with the state, I don't support it. So I don't need to defend that. Destruction number two. Matt says, at a certain point, if you want to continue your corporation, in most cases, show me an example of a highly successful capitalism endeavor that has not or will not fuse. Again, if they fuse with the government, I'm not defending them, I don't support that, and I would not call that capitalism. So you're attacking something that libertarians and myself are not defending. Matt says, but you need to acknowledge that over time this happens. It does fuse. I don't support that. I'm not defending that. I don't want them to do that. Stop it, I would tell them if I was talking to mega corporations. Don't use guns to get your way. Talking about mega corporations as some kind of collective that behaves in a way is also fallacious. These are groups of people or individuals that run corporations that make decisions in a market. If everyone makes a bad decision, it doesn't make the bad decision right, acceptable, or something that I have to defend. A bunch of people make bad decisions every day. A bunch of people put on blue uniforms and with little cute little badges and go think they're heroes every day. Doesn't mean I support it. Doesn't mean I agree with it. Doesn't mean I support it. Doesn't mean it's libertarianism. I'm not ignoring you. Okay, well, that was fun.
Yeah, I also think it's important to actually define what this do harm is and what constitutes being in bed with the state. So like if we're talking the business enforces a mask policy or goes with the OSHA vaccine mandates to avoid a fine, is that them doing harm if they let people off because they won't get vaccinated? Or is that them trying to protect their property from a malicious force that wants to bend them to their will? You know, I mean, I don't want to speak for Matt. Maybe he's one of those sovereign citizen types, but I think most of us capitulate to the state's whims in some cases, whether it's just to avoid harm or directly to prevent harm. So I don't know. I mean, there's so much context needed in this kind of thing for anybody to even be able to make the determination.
It's almost like we need him on the show to talk to him and have it not be a one-way conversation. He says, you cannot become majorly successful without fusing with the state. That might be true. So what? I'm still not going to defend it, even if that's what it takes to become majorly successful. Fine, then don't become majorly successful. Fine. He says, I don't support it either, and I don't want it either, but that is what happens. Well, dude, the world is full of statists that think the government is legitimate. Of course they're going to fuse with the state. Why would you expect them not to? That doesn't mean that there's a flaw in capitalism. It's a flaw in the fact that statism exists, and a lot of people believe the state is justified and is rightful and just. And why wouldn't you take every advantage you could to get to hook up with government to get a competitive advantage? You have a fiduciary duty to your investors. You could be sued if they think you're derelict in duty and not doing everything you can to make them money. And if you think the government and the state is legitimate, why the hell won't you pay for your lobbyists? Why wouldn't you? That's not a fault in capitalism. That's a fault in the general world at large right now that we're trying to fix.
And if we're talking about like the libertarian perfect capitalism viewpoint, the state wouldn't have the capacity to involve with like, and I'm speaking from like a party libertarian even. I'll even be that charitable. Even if the state continued to exist, which I'm not advocating for, but for the libertarians who want that, it wouldn't have the capacity to engage with actual real private capitalism on any of the levels that I'm assuming, because I still don't know, you're talking about. So, yeah, I mean, like, I don't even want a government. So, like, my capitalism, there's not going to be a chance for the corporations to get in bed with the government. So, I don't know. I mean, I feel like we're kind of arguing with like a ghost.
Yeah,
you know, like,
yeah.
This is general idea, but yeah,
we're done. He had his chance. That was fun destruction. Okay, so I think the last thing I want to mention is like the Twitter. Let's talk about the Twitter thing.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's do this. This will be good.
I mean, if you have to go, we don't have to do it now.
No. I've got time.
I'm
not in a rush.
I have specifically not done this, and there's been two prominent cloutarians that I have outed recently. Peter Quinones said that he is not an anarchist anymore because he wants to be able to control businesses forcibly to allow him on their property if they choose to require vaccinations. He wants to violate the consent of the property owner, which is, of course, antithetical to basic libertarianism, basic anarchism. He's making himself the de facto ruler of that property the moment they choose to use their property or make rules for their property in which he disagrees with. Do I think the rules are dumb? Of course I do. Do I think people have the right to make dumb rules for their property? Of course I do. I wouldn't be an anarchist, wouldn't be a capitalist, I wouldn't be a libertarian if I thought differently. And what we're finding is, and I'm still searching, I'm soul searching for the reason why this is the case, but there's just been a wave of these libertarians that just, they come through, they get a bunch of clout, they build up an audience, and then all of a sudden they're no longer libertarians or anarchists anymore. What was the other one? Said he wasn't a libertarian anymore. What was his name?
Oh God, there's been so many.
I know.
Are you talking?
Yeah, and I'm doing a good job of outing them on Twitter lately.
You listed two, and I know I've seen more than that. I've seen people retweeting them. I just usually scroll past it. I'm like, oh, another one bites the dust, you know?
Yeah, it's just these little micro authoritarians are getting brought out in people over this COVID stuff.
So to try to be like we were with the essay, and to try to be as charitable as possible, I understand why these people are frustrated. I really do. Yeah. Like I get it. Like, trust me, I get it. It seems insurmountable. Hell, it might be insurmountable. I'll even give you that. But the idea that because bad things are happening, we have to give up our principles to get the good things is not how any of this works at all. It never did.
It was you're living in Ancapistan in your head. Get on. You're gonna enjoy your ride on the boxcar. That was the stuff that was going around on Twitter, right? And you know what? Yeah. We're having this discussion now, so like the people that stuck through the hard philosophy for 3 hours enjoy the candy at the end. So that's what this is. But they said things like we can have our principles once we're free, but now we need to do whatever we got to do to be. I'm like, wow, cart before the horse. If you're using your principles to determine that we're not free now, but then you're throwing them away when they're supposed to affect your behavior. With those principles are what's telling you that there's a problem, and now you're going to chunk them, go to war, act like the statists, the people that your principles say are evil. You're going to go and do the stuff that they do to achieve freedom. It's the most absurd thing. It's the most absurd, contradictory thing I've heard in a long time.
This is why I spend so much time nitpicking language and the fundamental details, because I genuinely believe that once people really understand why things are the way that we advocate for them to be, like the fundamental principles behind why we believe voluntarist or anti-subjectivist positions to be the
I like it. It's growing on me. It's growing on me. Yeah.
Why we believe these things to be a correct answer for how to live a moral life and a valid one with the least arbitrary premises possible built into it. It makes it a lot easier to understand why you can't do these kinds of things. But if you were an ANCAP or a libertarian because, man, freedom's cool, I like freedom's great, and then you're not getting your freedom, it makes sense to me why a person and I'm going to say it with such a rudimentary understanding of the principles to begin with would make that kind of a decision, because it was always just like I feel like I'm jumping the gun a bit, but I don't know what else I can do. It feels to me like they never understood why these things were important to begin with, and they just happened to have ends that were in alignment. So like they were always consequentialists. It just so happened that the flavor of consequentialism agreed with actual principled fundamental people.
I think there's definitely a difference between the personality traits that allow you to grow a large audience quickly and the personality traits required to become a accomplished, knowledgeable philosopher. Like there's a difference there. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I certainly don't have both, right? So let's just acknowledge my own weaknesses. But that's fine. Like there's these people that sort of discover, like I don't want to speak ill of everybody, but there's people that have recently like flipped from being a Trumper, a MAGA Republican. They've discovered liberty. They've discovered anarchism, and they're just on this tear. And I guarantee you, I've seen it happen so many times. Like, wait a year, wait 2-3 years max, and they're going to be on to the next thing. They're going to have discovered the next thing that feels right, because they're making their philosophical decisions and holding their positions based on their feelings and not reasoning their way to it as best as possible. So I can just see it coming, and I think we're just seeing a big wave of it, and it's all hitting because we're in this exigent circumstance of COVID. These regulations are just screwing with everybody's lives, and you know, I hate these businesses that are capitulating. They're not resisting. They're choosing to defend themselves from the threats of government by capitulating and by acquiescing to the threats. And while that is a method of defense for them, it is complying with the aggressor is a form of self-defense. And it is their right to choose how they defend themselves and their property and their business. It's their right. It's their property. And if complying, they think, will lead them to have their property aggressed on the least, It's their right and their decision to make it, even though I hate it. I don't shop at places that require masks. I will never patronize a place that has the audacity to demand that I be vaccinated to enter I just won't go. I will never do that. I will go farm in the middle of nowhere if that's what it takes. That's how strongly I feel about it, and that's how much I dislike the companies that do it. But I don't have to like people to respect their rights. In fact, what I like and don't like is completely immaterial. If I want those people to respect my rights, I have to respect their rights and their property. Now, of course, the first thing that somebody says after that is, well, these mega corporations are in bed with government, so that's not really private property anymore. It's a Mott and Bailey that happens now in this discussion, and it happens in real time on Twitter. Mott and Bailey is when you tactically alternate between two arguments. There's an argument that's easily defended, that isn't very extreme, and there's a very extreme argument that's almost impossible, maybe even impossible to defend. And so you start out by taking the extreme, hard to defend argument, and then when I show how it's easily flawed, you rhetorically flip back to the Mott, the easy to defend one. And that's what's happening here. So like when I say that companies, property owners, anyone, and when I say company, I just mean us, people like us. My house is equivalent to my business, is equivalent to any other property I own. When I say that I have the right to determine how I defend myself against government violence, and if my chosen method of defense is capitulating to keep from getting attacked or having my property destroyed, and when I say that that's my right to do so, and people then, so I have successfully destroyed, in my opinion, shown why it is unlibertarian to aggress against people's property rights when they're choosing their method of self-defense, and then you switch the argument to megacorporations that are involved, that are woven into the government. Well, that's a different argument. I'm not defending those people. I'm not defending Walmart that points government guns at people to maintain its monopoly. I'm not. I don't care. Like, I think if you can show, and that's the point, it has to be case by case. It has ethics function individual to individual, case by case. You can't just say megacorps and then hashtag tread on them. Like, you have to show case by case, owner by owner, property owner by property owner, individual to individual. And if you can make the case that Walmart takes stolen money in the form, from the government, tax money from the government, if you can show that they've helped enact legislation that gives them an advantage, fine. Trespass. Don't wear a mask in there. Walk in, lie and walk in there unvaccinated, if they were to require such a thing. I don't care. Like, if they're going to use force on you, who cares? Do whatever you need to do. But that's not what I'm talking about. Get out of the Mott. I'm talking about the Bailey, right? Like, 95% of companies out there are not actively in bed with the government. They're not megacorps that are, passing legislation to maintain a monopoly. That's what I'm talking about. Those people all have a right to make rules on their property. Yeah, rant over. Go ahead.
There's one protraction I've seen since we're, we gotta use as many big words as possible today, right? The one that I've seen was an example of a gas station. He was talking about how, I can't even go into the store and buy a pack of cigarettes without being taxed and without having to wear a mask or get vaccinated and blah, blah, blah. For too long, they won't allow me inside at all. And I was like, okay, well, he started at the Bailey, and I was like, before retreating to the Mott. And so I asked him, like, do you think your local Valero is in bed with the government? And he's like, oh yeah, well, Valero buys their gas from blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, do you think that the guy who owns that store, who's trying to make his 20 cents or whatever on the gas that he gets from the company that was chartered to him by somebody, like, I feel like you have to abstract these things onto so many levels to try to justify, like, violating their property rights. Like, I can't help but wonder where the intentions are, really. Like if this was your business and you had even let's say your company uses AWS, which AWS is used by the majority of the United States as networking services. Does that mean that your company is now in bed with the company is now in bed with the company that's in bed with the government? So by this trickle down effect, your property rights can be violated. And like, where the fuck do you draw the line on this? Like, I think you can make some strong primary source cases, but this kind of goes back to like the how do we distribute public property, unowned land conversation. It's like this is a almost insurmountable problem, right? And so to some level, we have to make good judgments in good faith. We have to make good judgments in good faith is what I would say would be like the best thing to do.
I had this discussion 2 years ago, pre-COVID, with Stephan Kinsella, and he quoted, well, he didn't quote Hobbes, but he used the Hobbesian term "war of all against all" to say, as justification why we shouldn't start drawing these lines of conclusion between these corporations that get in bed with the government and us now not needing to respect their rights. And he seemed to be taking the position that we shouldn't do this at all. Like, he basically was saying, and I'm paraphrasing, and might be a little off here, so I don't intend this to be a mischaracterization. So in all fairness, I believe this was his position at the time, that, once we start trying to decide which corporations have gotten too in bed with the government that we no longer have to respect their rights, well, where does it stop? It's just all going to devolve into a war of all against all, which is kind of what you were talking about. And to which I mostly agree. Like, the government is so effectual in everything in our life. You can draw a line from government to everything if you really tried. Even if you tried a little bit and didn't even really try. And my only counterpoint was, look, if we can draw a straight line from like stolen money to a company, then that's enough for me. Like, just that first tier. We don't have to go spider out into the 50,000 ways, you, Christian, could be 7 steps removed from government theft.
I'm sure I am. I'm sure I'm the 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon from the government somehow.
I'm just saying, like, how about we just do the first level? I think the first level is justified. Like, if we can draw a straight line from stolen money to a company, then at least in that direct case, because we can do that especially with these public companies, they're all their financials are in the open. Fine, do that. I do agree that once you start spidering out, it does become a war of all against all, and it kind of loses its utility. And what's the real evil that we're fighting here? The government or literally everyone? So like maybe if we get government out, the spiders will reduce. But dude, like, I work really hard not to benefit from government stolen money above what I've had stolen from me. I should clarify, right? Like, there's no like if they've stolen $1 million from me over my lifetime and I find ways to acquire, 900 grand of that back, no harm, no foul. I think, on balance, I'm still morally positive, let's say. But, but yeah, so like, I try really hard to not be that guy that is a hypocrite or that, colludes with the government or becomes a post facto beneficiary or co-conspirator in the theft crime is what I would probably say. And I don't have a problem with people that hold these megacorps to that standard. Like, look, be as big of a corporation as you want, but don't point guns at people. Otherwise, I don't care about your rights anymore. And that goes to my definition of rights. That's why rights are so powerful when properly understood as reciprocal agreements. If you point government guns at me, Walmart, let's say, I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm sure somebody probably could draw the line from government to Walmart, but I'm not personally aware of that line. I'm just saying, like, I'm not going to really care about your property rights, and I don't feel any onus to really care. And that's what rights are. It's like, you better behave in ways that would make other people want to continue reciprocating with you if you want to be protected. That's my point.
Yeah, and that 1 degree of separation kind of comes back to the good faith thing that I was talking about. Like, this is kind of an arbitrary distinction. I think I'm okay with accepting that, because it's like, if we were to say that this is like some rule that must be followed or whatever to be moral, then it would be all or none, essentially. But I think just for our mental health a little bit, maybe the good faith approach will help us all in the long run. Because if you're stressing every time you walk up to an establishment of like whether or not you're going to violate their property rights today, like, I would err on the side of not in as many cases as you can, because you you cannot become a state of nature being by respecting somebody's property rights. Let me put it that way. Whether or not, the eccentricities of it or the details, you could come up with a circumstance to justify yourself. I would just always err on the side of caution in that regard. So.
Phobia says, he doesn't want a solution. He wants to be mad. Yeah, he's talking about the Twitter people. Yeah, that's very true. I mean, you won't find freedom in government. I think we've demonstrated this enough. You're not going to find it. Maybe this is a wake-up call some people need to hear. I doubt it's the people who are here. You all probably agree with me. But we are a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. Sorry to use collectivist language. But I don't think there's any amount of governmenting and politicking that you can do to get rid of the crimes of the state. And I feel like the last, almost 2 years now has kind of demonstrated that. People are waking up. People are seeing liberty as a viable alternative, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next week. It's not going to happen next year. We're in it for the long haul, boys. So just know that now, and your life will be much happier. Yeah, and find a way to be happy. Like, you only live YOLO. You only live once. Like, your atoms are stuck together for a limited amount of time. Don't spend the whole time raging about the state of the world right now. Do what you can to change it, but find ways to be happy and to live in spite of it and be happy in spite of it. I think the thing that I want to end the show on is what JD just said. He says, "Dude, let us live free. Let us homestead whatever's currently unowned but occupied by states, and forget the past. It won't matter. We'll all be too rich to care." Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Anything you want to say, Christian? Tell people where they can find you.
You guys can find me on Liberty After Dark on Odysee. Fuck YouTube. You guys, eventually I'll make some more content at some point. I promise I will. Or you can go and watch the video, my most recent video of me talking about sucking dick for coconuts, and go bash on some commies in the comments. There's plenty of them.
Personally, I would say no. It's not immoral for the person to ask for their dick to be sucked in exchange for the coconuts.
Yeah, if you can't tell, that was a really awkward sentence to say in front of the camera. Like, I was actually very seriously addressing a hypothetical where people suck dick on islands for coconuts, or don't, because it might be immoral. So, yeah.
And I'm never going to play that again. This was the final premiere of that clip because it's so out of context. Like, I would fucking hate to have that constantly played. So, man. It's been a good joke. I will not do it anymore. Thank you, Christian.
Oh, geez. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thanks for coming on. I always enjoy nerding out on philosophy with you. I look forward to doing it again soon. All right, man.
Yeah.
Everybody, thanks for watching. Have a great day.